at least for UCLA campus, he's the only video of like anyone even claiming that students are blocking people from going to campus, because he's deliberately going up to the encampment in an effort to try to get into the encampment to start fights. When I was there, a bunch of Zionist counter-protesters tried to do that as well. And the students were incredibly well organized, and they just set up a human chain. Like, they don't even like physically apprehend or remove people. They basically just body block them as though they are.
As soon as they put on emote only mode, chat, I had to do it.
Having a picnic.
I had to do it.
Oh yeah, no, I saw that, and I think it was
Let's
like
get back into
2
it.
nights ago, not last night, whenever all this stuff got removed, but the night before. I mean, it was pretty obvious that like the Israeli or like Zionist or anti-Palestinian ones were the aggressors, and I think that that's a bad thing. I mean, I don't think that the guy is in the wrong though for being a counter-protester or even for being an agitator. Really, it depends on how you define the word. Because,
what?
I mean,
no, he's 100% in the wrong.
I feel like that's what's fair, in the same way that it's fair for those other people to go and protest for Palestine.
Yeah, but the difference is, first of all, bear mace or mace in general is illegal to bring to protest, and he's like flashing it. There's another video of the students literally.
I mean, I understand why he's soft, just so he can do this, right? I don't think I can get Asmongold on the stream because I yelled at him too much. You know what I mean?
We're peacefully protesting against the Israeli genocide here. Like, we see your bear mace. Like, please, you're making us feel unsafe. And he actually literally does not have a right to have that on him. And yet, on that very same night, last night, he was over there.
I think he'll backpedal and then immediately go on a stream like later today or tomorrow, and we'll double down. That's what my prediction is.
Especially because 2 nights prior, at this point, when the counter protesters actually tried to enter the encampment, they came with weapons, they came with fireworks, they came with skunk spray, they came with bear mace.
That was like the day that because they were chanting the "Where were you?" Was this the "Where were you" moment?
I don't know what do you mean, where were you?
The roaches eat him. Brett, what's up?
Cinemarxism just subscribed.
Thank you for the resubscription.
Yeah, okay. So like we're talking about the same thing, right?
So the night prior, the reason why they were chanting "Where were you" last night to the cops is probably because the night prior, Zionist counter-protesters actually stormed the camp and beat the shit out of some of the Palestinian students, or pro-Palestinian students, with like wood pallets.
I watched it happen. I watched it happen live. It was disgusting. Like I was kind of disappointed that the police didn't arrest any of them.
Yeah. The police came.
So how do you have that take and then immediately be like gleefully laughing when the police did the exact same thing? You know what I mean?
In single file line formation.
The exact same thing the next day. You're like, I love that because there was no difference.
Like, you can see it in the video.
Nothing happened between that 24-hour period from the day that the Zionist agitators started throwing fireworks or
there's also
smoke bombs and
the
stuff.
protesters that are Palestinians that were identified as being older as well.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's hard to really
I'm saying. No, I'm saying that like a lot of these guys, especially the more violent ones, have already been like.
Yeah, I saw it. I thought it was disgusting, but I still think they should be allowed in the encampment, which is probably his take.
And they're basically return customers. And they're basically return customers at this point. It was a big point of contention with the students too, because UCLA was like, "Oh, we are going to take administrative action against the counter protesters for being violent," and the students were frustrated with that because they were like, "How the fuck are you going to do anything as an administration to someone who's not a student?" Because a lot of the counter protesters were not students, like there were known right-wing figures and stuff like that amongst the counter protesters. Anyway, so the reason why the students were frustrated, understandably, is because they've demonstrated great messaging discipline so far. They are very, they're as limited in their disruption as possible. And historically speaking, campus-wide protests such as this one is infinitely more disruptive than
honestly. The one thing I want from this, I don't care about anything else. I don't care about Asmongold changing his mind or conceding or anything, because I know it won't last. I need Hassan to press Asmongold about the occupation specifically. I need Hassan to ask him what he thinks that we should do as people whose tax money is going to Israel, and what he thinks the line is.
Really just like shut off access for any...
Not just about the protests, not just about Asmongold's convenience, but like directly about the occupation and the deaths of 35 to 40,000 Palestinians. Palestinians that have been slaughtered.
And way more disruptive approaches to protest. So all things considered, both in the Columbia University, where they overtook Hamilton Hall again, just like they had done time and time again at Columbia specifically.
It's a grift.
That hall has a historical significance for student protesters. And also, especially at UCLA, where the encampment was like not even remotely disruptive, simply just taking on this massive lawn space where there's a lot of demonstrations usually, and building putting tents around it and trying to protect the tents from people coming in and fucking it up. There are videos of counter protesters breaking into the encampment in spite of the human wall, the human shield, the human chain that they create. And as soon as they get in, they start fucking throwing hooks, throwing bows, stealing people's fucking tents, trying to like shit on, like trying to break the tents apart and stuff. So that's the reason why they don't want to let in random people to protect the students, because they know the university won't do that. As demonstrated by the fact that they didn't do that when the counter protesters came and the cops literally stood idly by.
I do think that like whenever I watched it live, there was like crazy fucking violence. And then once the cops showed up, even whenever they were in that line, the violence went down by like 95%. But I think that you're totally right that the counter protesters were like the agitators. They 100% were, and they were being violent. And to me,
so that's why they should be allowed in the encampment.
Police didn't arrest more of them, because it was pretty obvious that the pro-Palestinian ones were the ones that were the victims in that situation.
Yeah, but they ended up arresting only the Palestinian, like the pro-Palestinian side. And the night prior, they didn't actually engage with the counter protesters.
The arrival of police.
Until
the police were
until they were setting off fireworks and
it was,
launching them directly in the encampment.
They were still boxing people because the police weren't doing anything.
The question is, why are they picking a side? Because they've arrested hundreds of students, both at Columbia University, both in CCNY. What's up?
You mean why are the police picking a side?
The police are picking a side, and it's not the side that is the violent side in this situation. It's the side that's peacefully demonstrating. In my opinion, a direct violation of First Amendment rights.
My computer.
I don't even personally believe that protesters are supposed to, protests are going to be disruptive. Some of those protest movements you might not agree with, or the taxes you might not agree with. But ultimately, the way I look at it is they were the perfect victims in this situation, even though I don't expect them to be perfect victims. And yet, even after all of that, they were still met with violent free speech suppression from the state.
I don't know if it's really free speech suppression, right? Because they're not really getting arrested for protesting. They're getting arrested for putting a bunch of tents on the campus whenever the campus tells them to leave.
Yeah,
I mean, the police
nobody ever gets arrested for protesting. That's just
thank you.
That's not a thing.
That's actually a good counter.
Everybody always when
it's always something else.
In Russia or in China or whatever, when people are
or even
getting
MLK.
arrested for protesting,
he hates that.
The state, of course, makes up another reason for it.
We're not gonna say we're arresting you for protesting.
They'll be like, trespassing. You know what I mean?
Obstructing. But do you think that's unreasonable?
Yes.
Do I think that arresting someone for protesting peacefully is unreasonable? Yes.
Yeah. Well, do I think that? I mean, I think a better question is that if you own a property, should you have the autonomy to decide?
Okay, so it's like you can only protest on.
Well, in this circumstance,
also,
it's literally
these are public
institutions.
Yeah,
it's UCLA. UCLA is a public school too, so that ultimately changes the dynamic a lot. It depends on what the property is, though. There's private property, like someone's house, right? I don't think that people should come to your house and protest it at your house. It's very
protest
different.
On Twitter only,
disrupting your life, and violating your privacy and safety, versus protesting in the middle of a public space at the school that you pay tuition to is perfectly valid, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well, everybody else pays tuition too. I think it's kind of unfair. For example, some people that pay tuition are locking other people out that are also paying tuition from the same services that they're both paying for.
So that's it. You bring up a good point, right? Like you're saying, this person also pays tuition. He should be able to go to any space he wants to, any place he wants to on campus, which is correct.
I mean,
this is general. Even if they're not striking, even if they're not protesting.
So obviously,
if you're standing on campus, Oh, guess what? You're taking up space that other people have paid for. Oh, what are you gonna do? Oh, you're sitting in a seat in the mess hall, in a dining hall. Oh, well, like somebody else has paid for that seat as well, so you're taking up the seat for them. It literally makes no sense. This logic falls apart when you do a little bit of analysis.
The occupying, and
it's so dumb.
The reason why they're not letting, like, they weren't disrupting class, they weren't stopping people from going to class. The university, as a matter of fact, is the reason why the other buildings that were in the surrounding area were shut down. I talked to the students when I was there, and they stated they wanted to go to the library, for example. It's across the green area is across the way from the library. They shut down the library during midterms so that these guys' lives would be harder, so that they would have a harder time studying. They shut down the Wi-Fi so that students that are on the encampment would not be able to use it. Trying to make, make.
You can tell he thinks he's superior because he appears calmer, even though he doesn't have actual point. Yeah.
Thing to do, personally. I think it probably goes against the values that UCLA espouses, specifically, ironically.
We haven't heard a lot of Asman because Hassan talks so much. He talks a lot.
Terminology in their studies, like USC literally doesn't have genocide studies. They call it resistance to genocide studies.
He yaps quite a bit.
Oh, boy.
So for me, it's like, if you're taking that extra initiative to be extra woke on the aesthetic front, you should probably not be surprised when your students learn the actual lessons that you're teaching in these classes, which is that you should resist the genocide, right? So the fact that the university turns around after teaching them
Ask him
about,
if he thinks it's a genocide, Hassan.
And then tries to do everything in their
if
power
they left the
to
chat
make it
open,
as, like, annoying
I wouldn't
for
have
these
went
students as possible. Is
as
a little
soon as they put it on emote only mode, I had to.
It is hypocritical, but it's also something that's driven by the protesters' actions, and the protesters are doing that.
Yeah, but why are the protesters' actions happening?
That is the university shutting down those places, and also the university. And you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, because I'm not really sure exactly. This is just what I've heard. I thought that about 2 days ago, the UCLA said that the protest was unlawful.
Hi, what's up?
But before then, they were basically kind of like not addressing it or not calling in the police to do anything. Is that right?
You're welcome.
No, they actually did call the police, but they called the campus police specifically to protect the encampment. I was actually kind of surprised at the university's actions at that time, because they knew that there were a lot of counter protesters that, in comparison to Columbia, for example, which had literally called the police against the encampment in Columbia University.
I saw that.
The UCLA campus actually had sent police.
He wants people to protest in a way that's not illegal, that's not inconveniencing people
to the encampment. That's not just symbolism. That actually means something, right? When you send cops, like cops.
Works. If a user
I mean, if the university is allowing it, then really that's the end result. I mean, they're the ones that make that decision. It seems confusing to me.
That makes no sense.
Based off of the logic that, like, they're trying to shut down the the library or the Wi-Fi, but they're also, like, having police come in and protect them. It seems very confusing. Like, what are their goals here? What are they trying to do?
Well, ultimately,
awareness for genocide?
Their goal is to get the students to shut the fuck up and go away and stop bothering the administration to make these moves about divestment. I don't know if you're familiar with the goals of the student protests were, and every campus is different, but, like, specifically the UCLA one I can speak to
is the divest.
Yeah, it's to divest from UCLA. The UC system across the board is a massive endowment.
I had to come back for this,
and that endowment basically works like a mutual fund. And they're investing in a lot of corporations, and the students want to have financial transparency in what corporations the university endowments are going to, like what corporations they're investing in, which is perfectly valid, perfectly reasonable demands to make. As a matter of fact, a lot of companies have done this. A lot of people have done this successfully, demanding that people divest from oil and gas companies for, like, environmental activism. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, it's been going on a lot. And just for the record, like, I totally support them protesting against that. Even if I agree or disagree with it, it's their right to protest against that. The only concern that I have is whenever it shuts down other students' ability to learn or get an education, or for people to use the facilities in the way that they're intended to. Yeah. Whenever you talk about the actual, like, intent of the protesters, I totally support them. Absolutely. or even the counter protesters, because that's
What?
freedom of speech. I think that, if you don't have that, I mean, you don't have anything.
Yeah, as long as they're not, long as they're not trying to like directly agitate, disrupt, and like harm the students, because there's also a completely separate dynamic
But
here.
like that's
You
what
hate
he's
doxing,
defending,
right? Like,
you know what I mean?
I assume, of course.
We all do.
So, would it shock you if I were to tell you that there are active organizations that collaborate sometimes with the Israeli government, sometimes independently, that are tasked with doxing students deliberately,
Project, baby.
and even putting their faces on trucks around the campus, and driving those trucks around the campus with their massive fucking billboards, basically saying like this student, their name, and be like, this is an anti-Semite.
Gonna be like, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I would instantly believe that. I mean, absolutely, and I'm sure that there are people on the other side to do the same thing. It's just simply
there aren't any official organizations in the same way that Canary Mission,
like,
in the same way
come
that, like,
on, he keeps both sizing it like this is an equal situation. It's not. Do I have to pull up the numbers again, dog?
Organizations as well.
40,000 to 1,600. It's not equal. They're not the same. They're not even comparable.
You're a fucking anti-Semite, and then they plaster their faces. They literally try.
He's like, oh, they're probably from the other side as well. Who goes out the way that like docs Jewish students. Like, no, that's not happening. They're occupying the lawn because they don't have that infrastructure. They don't have those resources.
Well, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And this is kind of the problem that I have, and I think that really, to me, it's pretty obvious that being against Israel doesn't mean that you hate Jews, right?
Of course, and there are plenty of Jews who are against Israel as well. Especially at those protests.
Well, there's even some that are protesting in Israel, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I understand that, and I think that's problematic too. I don't agree with that either. It's, in my opinion, I think it's intimidation, but it's also like a misrepresentation. So yeah, I think that's bad in the same way that anybody else. I also don't think that people who are pushing back against these people, like the actual protesters that are making the encampments and everything like that, I don't think that they're fascists. Like, I have people calling me a fascist, for example, which I think is really kind of overboard.
You cheered on police
and
I think also like some of those guys are fascists, for the record. I do.
Like, what do you mean?
And I bet some of the people that are against Israel are anti-Semites.
Oh,
absolutely.
My goodness,
yeah, but
bro. It's not the same. It's not comparable.
I don't disagree with you. I think there's like definitely anti-Semitism in the pro-Palestinian movement as well. But the broader, you have to look at the broadest defense of the
literally
movement,
not comparable,
right? Like, what does the movement signify? What their overarching goals are?
Members of the Knesset.
The reason why
we need to
I have
flatten Gaza,
an easier time calling those who defend Israel fascist is because Zionism. Is predicated on the idea that Israel has to be a Jewish supremacist ethno-state that literally has.
But like you'll find anti-Semites literally on both sides
inside of Israel.
Like you find
this is a demographic concern, unlike any other. Here in the United States of America, if we were to say America has to be a nation that is 75%, Irish, English, and German, white. Everyone would understandably go, that's fucking insane. That's just white supremacy. But Zionism is that exact same principle, is that exact same concept, but for very valid historical reasons, it has been able to shelter itself as a defensive posture, as though it is a
which is why he came here, right? In this way to be like, oh, I agree with you, Hassan. I agree with you, Hassan.
Like World War II and
right?
everything that happened.
We agree.
Yeah.
No, he'll turn around back on his own stream and be like, yeah, dog. Like, I'm glad these protesters got beat up. They were standing in the road or whatever.
It's not my fight.
You know what I mean?
Fight. It's not my problem.
It is actually. I mean, listen.
Well,
it is.
I mean, that's a good point. Yeah, no, I know.
We do spend a shit ton of tax dollars to defend Israel. We gave $26 billion to Israel just this past week.
I mean. Yeah,
I mean,
I think it's a fucking waste of money. It's absolutely a waste of money.
Okay,
I wouldn't want to support that.
So
especially not whenever they're doing
what would you do then?
Like bombing.
You're supporting it now.
Over in Gaza and shit. Like, of course.
If you don't,
why would I want?
Okay, so what are you doing?
To support that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Which is why I think the protest that these students are engaging in.
He's like, I wouldn't support that, but also I don't support people
who
are
their methods are
wanting to
above
stop
and beyond.
that. Like I do.
There are rarely ever going to be protests where like you have a hard time finding a single person that doesn't say something wrong, or a single person that doesn't get
and
ahead
it's like,
get ahead of
you're
themselves.
totally right. I mean, you can't color an entire like movement based off of like the most like
Extreme examples.
extremists or like the most bad actors, right? The same as like, I'm
He's
sure
done his
there are
combos. He's out of his
anti-Semites that
depth.
are
He is.
Palestinian, pro-Palestinian,
I
but
tell you,
that's not
I told you what he was going to
that's
do,
not
and
the
he's doing
majority
it. I
of
told
them.
you he was going
there,
to
there are also
walk
there are
it
also
back.
people who
He
are
was
trying to
going
co-opt.
to,
Like, there's always like a bunch of charlatans on Twitter
he was going
who are
to
actually
neuter his
neo-Nazis,
language.
like, openly.
He was going
but then they'll
to
be like,
middle
oh
ground
yeah,
his way
how about
here.
them Jews? Like they'll
Like,
try
no,
to
I
like
agree with
sneak
you. I
in to
agree
be
with
like,
you.
oh
I agree
yeah,
with
we
you. I
love
agree with you. I
Palestine,
agree
right?
with you. Right?
When in fact you've
Yeah, I think that's bad that
you
we're
look,
bombing people
a couple
overseas.
tweets
Yeah, I
down,
think
and
that's
then
bad.
fucking.
But also, he would never reckon with the fact that like he's still against the protest.
That is actually part of the reason why.
You know what I mean? If you're against
organizers
it,
are very careful.
what do you
with
think
who
the
they let
students should
into
do?
the
You know what I
encampment
mean?
as well. Because they don't want to make sure that they want to make sure that there's no one that
what do you think the goal
Palestine
is?
or seemingly in support of Palestine that's in there to say like some fuck shit.
Because if you
they do a very good job with that
on
too.
our side, if you truly understand that those things were bad, you would be standing side by side with the protesters.
So that's the other reason why they don't let everyone into the encampment.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of understand that, but I think that it's also really determined based off of the university. Like, the truth is that the university should have the final say on whether the encampment like that should exist or not. And I think that really, if the university is okay with it, then
I care about your cause, but like the university and liberal niceties and the rule of law.
But I think if the university doesn't want the encampment, I don't think that the students have the right to make an encampment there. I think that's unfair.
I mean, I think that ultimately, especially like protesters will always be disruptive, obviously, but
they're literally paying thousands of dollars.
Are only determined by how lawful they are. You can write a law to make any protest illegal, which Americans kind of have, as a matter of fact. I don't know if it would shock you to find out if I were to tell you that in the state, in your state, in Texas, if you want to work for the Texas state, if you want to work for the city,
university doesn't want you to do,
you have to actually sign a law that says you will never engage in boycotting or demanding divestment or demanding sanctions on the state of Israel. Did you know this? That's a direct violation of First Amendment rights. A direct violation.
Well, how did that even happen?
AIPAC wrote the legislation. This was legislation that actually two Jewish prominent members of Congress were very much against, as a matter of fact. Bernie Sanders and Dianne Feinstein have
the right to protest, but not
openly criticized
but he also supports the right
obvious
for the police
First Amendment violation boundaries.
You actually learned he's posturing? He's posturing.
I've never heard of that.
He's 100% posturing.
I heard there's like some anti-Semitism bill that was happening today. I haven't read about
it yet. He's 100% posturing. He does not care. He does not care. He does not care. He does not care.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, would it shock you to find out that there's actually 35 other states, many of them?
And I don't think Hassan is oblivious to this. Hassan's not dumb. I don't think Hassan is oblivious to this. Hassan knows he does not care. Right. His goal is not to reach out to Hassan's goal is for a video to be cut of this and clipped of this, of like Asmongold learning, that to be posted to LSF and to Twitter, and Asmongold's audience seeing him being like, wow, okay, I get it now, and maybe changing their minds, right? That's what his goal is. But he's not changing Asmongold's mind.
Which he is personally violating.
You know what I mean? He's not.
By
and he knows this.
Using the government.
It was the same thing with Ethan.
Are you talking about the recent one?
Yeah. So no matter what happens, like the idea that like every single protest has to go through like a permits process is obviously, I think, a little bit ridiculous, because like that permit process is there to like genuinely make the state restrict certain kinds of speech and only allow other kinds of speech to exist, which
I don't know if y'all saw Capri's tweet, but he actually gets very mad. He gets very mad when you bring up the fact that he would have been against desegregation, right? He's not very happy with that comparison.
Oh yeah, of course they do. And yeah, I see what you're saying. Absolutely. And I think that there's probably a middle ground with that, where it's like, if people are protesting and there's a tent there, it's okay. Probably not a really big deal. But I still do think that the university, or especially other like private businesses, should have every right to tell people not to be there. because it's also
Then what
their
is your
private
right to
property.
protest?
Like, I think
You get
somebody's
the right
to
to protest.
is
Do
really
you think that there's
important,
like
but I think it's
actual
also
public land?
important that
You
somebody
can't
has a
protest
right
on actual
to
public land
have
because that's owned
autonomy
by
over
the
their
federal
own
government.
property,
You can't
especially
protest on
whenever
private
if
property
something
because that's
happens
owned
to
by
somebody there, they could get
everybody
sued
else.
for it
Where
too.
are you supposed to
So,
protest?
and I think
In
that
this
that's really
room?
kind of what the problem with like a lot of this is that I think that like you and I probably align with a lot of the different like opinions that we have in terms of like Israel or Zionism or anything like that. I just don't really think that these methods are effective. And I think that
Then
they
what do you think?
alienate a lot more people than they bring in.
I think
Like
if
whenever
the
I saw, go
I
ahead.
think if the student protests were not effective,
What should we do?
Yeah.
they would
great
not
one.
have actually had
Ask him.
multiple
What
universities
is
at this point
Asmongold's
meet their
perspective?
demands, like in Northwestern and in Brown University,
The
and now as recently as a couple hours ago, Rutgers University has met the demands of Students for Justice for
I need
Palestine.
to know. Maybe Asmongold has thought of something
which
that
has
we
led
haven't
to the
thought of yet. Chet.
dispersal of the peaceful dispersal.
Maybe
of the
he's thought of
encampment.
something that
But
we just haven't thought of
beyond
yet.
that, I think that another testament to the success of these protests is the violent reaction of the state. Because in some ways, like
Brian
police
Russell's a bad
behaving in this
example.
way
I disagree.
also
I saw your,
galvanizes a lot of the
message in
protesters.
Chat as well. I disagree
as a
that
matter
it's
of
a
fact,
bad
like
example to use
this
here.
entire
We did not
conversation
get what we
started
wanted there,
originally
obviously,
quietly
but it's a
at
good example
Vanderbilt
of
University,
like,
where a couple of
it's a good example
fans of mine,
the theoretical process of things happening, right? Bad things happening, you protest, you come back, the other side comes back and say, hey, we don't like your protest, we're going to concede here. You say yes or no to that. You do this back and forth until you get to some middle ground that you agree on, right? That's how it's supposed to happen. So I think in that way, it is a decent example.
With the exception
right?
of,
I agree that the contract itself or the concessions that they got were terrible, right? But in theory, that's how it's supposed to happen.
In a way, they were profoundly successful. So successful that
you know a lot more. You know a lot more about this than I do. So I'm kind of curious. So you're talking about like how Brown University and a lot of these other universities successfully, the students have had their demands met. And so whenever you say that, oh, okay. Well, the ones that have, did they ever like have the police remove the encampments? Because like I think if the university is allowing it to happen, then I feel like the protest is totally justified. It's completely fine.
No, there was police presence on all the campuses as well, and the police actually said that they would be
but like that's the point we're making, right? In that we are saying the way that schools should react to it. So you're saying, yeah, if the schools did not say we should brutalize the protesters, I think the protests are good. But if the schools are like kill all the protesters, I think that you should kill all the protesters because, you know, that's what the schools said.
You either escalate, you either use the violent arm of the state to violently apprehend students, break apart the encampments,
if you
use pepper spray, tear gas,
they get to attack you. That's not how it works.
That's
actually a pretty good example.
You know, 100%,
which is why I said you have no rights.
Some of the members
Asman is not wrong, right? In his analysis, he's correct. He's saying what I said literally earlier today on my last stream. You have no rights. You have as many rights as the hegemonic, the widespread overarching power gives you. Right? If the U.S. government says, hey, you have the right to protest, but if you protest, we're going to shoot you, you don't have the right to protest.
You shouldn't be doing that. It's disgusting.
Well, I don't know if it would shock you to find out, but rubber bullets are not supposed to be directed directly at protesters. It's supposed to be a less than lethal apprehension method or riot control method. And when they actually do shoot someone in the face, they can kill them.
To the people, like you're not supposed to.
They're supposed to. Yeah, against fire extinguishers. What they're supposed to do is shoot it on the ground. These guys were directly aiming it at the faces of students. And also, it wasn't just students that were holding fire extinguishers. It was pretty much anyone and everyone. It was it was basically a kill zone. You can kill people with rubber bullets, by the way. That's why they call it less than lethal.
Yeah, no, you definitely can, but I'm not going to tell the police officers they're wrong for defending themselves against somebody who's blowing a fire extinguisher at them. I think that's ridiculous.
Kill them. Yes, thank you.
I think kill them. They have every right to defend themselves against that. Like,
do you think the students have a right to defend themselves?
They weren't being attacked.
Yes, they were.
They weren't being shot.
No, the cops were. At that point, the cops were apprehending them. They were arresting them on site.
Yeah, because they were breaking the law. and
Oh
the
my
university
goodness,
wanted them
bro.
off the campus.
Oh my
And they have
goodness,
every
bro.
right to
Oh
ask
my
them to leave
goodness.
the campus. They didn't do
You're
it.
right, bro. Let's
And
just
of
kill
course
him.
the cops
Kill
would
him.
have to remove them.
Let
Like,
me
Murder
ask you
them.
this way: do you think it's
Yes.
do you find it to be a just and proportionate response to unarmed students? And many of them, almost all
He
of them,
stole
are
Fizz's-
unarmed, and the
Fizz's
ones that
reply.
had,
Thank
I
you,
guess,
Fizz.
fire
Shout out to
extinguishers is
He
few.
said yes.
Do you think it's an appropriate response to violently, in full riot gear, violently apprehend and assault students because they're peacefully demonstrating, but the university now has demanded that they disperse? Like,
well, I think there's two different categories of that. So, for the students that are not being violent, because a lot of the students were being violent, they were throwing things at the cops, they were spraying fire extinguishers at them. I'm sorry, but that's not a peaceful protest. If you're spraying a fire
Yeah, why were the
extinguisher at a
cops
police
there in the
officer,
first
you're not being
place?
peaceful. So if the
well,
police officers are
Why
violent in
was the cops
return,
there?
no, I actually
It's
think
just
it's
so
totally fine.
this
stupid. This
well,
is so
here's the thing.
dumb. This is so dumb.
That's the reason why this is really
so
important,
dumb.
right? Like the reason
Yeah,
why,
yeah.
like, I'm glad I went to the encampment. I'm glad that, like, all
This
this
is
was
so
filmed.
dumb.
It was peaceful until the police came with weapons and with riot gear and started apprehending with physical force the students.
Well, of
if
course
you
it
look at
was.
the visuals from before
we're
the
checking the
police
cops' POV,
officers
yeah.
actually came onto campus, it was
This
actually
what it boils down to,
quite
chat. What it boils down to is Asmongold does not think the students' cause was just. That's it. That's it. Which is why he gets mad when you bring up the civil rights movement. If you thought people were if you put everything in context instead of Israel Palestine, you put it into context of segregation and desegregation, right? You saw the students fighting against segregation and saying segregation was bad, right? And you ask Asmongold, do you think the students deserve to be violently apprehended off the lawn when they're protesting segregation being bad and the cops were trying to defend segregation? You know what he would say? How dare you? How dare you position me against for segregation or whatever? You feel me? That's it, right? Because Asmongold understands that it would be bad to be against desegregation.
that the university divest
Congress is
from
making the same people said about MLK and I'd rather civil protest. 100%.
funding and facilitating.
100%.
I get that. I also totally disagree with it. I think the university should have every right to decide who is and isn't on their property. And I think in the instances that you were giving me an example of earlier, like Brown, I think that Brown didn't ask the police to come in and Brown allowed those protests to happen. And I think that's totally fine. But if the university doesn't want those people there, I think that at a certain point, they have every right to have the police come in and remove them. And the truth is that I don't think that the police were overly violent to a lot of those people. I really don't. I think.
I mean, there's a lot of visuals of people like bleeding profusely from the head, either due to getting hit in the head. But that's violence, right? Like that's.
Well,
it's
it's violence because it is like there's no other. So here's an interesting question, right? So like, what would you propose as an alternative to that? Like, how would you solve?
Oh, this is great.
Instead of having police. Yeah.
Great question.
Divest.
So
Divest.
my solution to this would be
divest.
Exactly what Brown and all of these other campuses did, which is to allow
Literally,
the
it's not
protest
even
to
hard.
continue, and also meet the demands to the best of your ability, and take an honest
the VIP
negotiation effort.
All right, well,
the
I mean, the
students,
SERPs is saying the same
because
thing.
ultimately,
Fizz. We all said divest.
if you believe personally,
also, I can
that
chat
these
in the
students are
freaking emote only mode. That's why I have the
and it
badge.
seems like,
Right. I'm
you
not being mean.
specifically do think that these students
I
are
think they have
making
every right
making
to
just demands.
Yeah, they are.
Right.
They have every right to protest. And
Yeah.
like, for example, like at UT here, like we had a lot of protests, and it was very disappointing for me to see a lot of people in my chat and just in the community in general that were celebrating whenever the police were coming in and removing them, because these people were not being violent. They weren't breaking the law. They were just protesting, and I completely support that.
Yeah, but until the university decides that they can't, is what you're saying,
Right.
for
Yes.
UCLA.
Yeah,
So
And that's my perspective.
Okay, so he's like,
So if
yeah,
the-
I thought it was
so the
bad.
UT
while they were
University of
there, while
Texas,
the university
Austin,
said they would be there.
Who
Who do they call the police?
Saying like, we don't want these protests
No, no,
on
no, no,
campus.
no, 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 no.
Leading to a police
No.
response would be-
He's lying. He's lying. Who called the police? You can't say that's your take. They'd be like, oh, I'm fine with it. The university said they were fine with it. And at UT, the university was fine with it. No, they weren't. They called the police.
On the situation.
They arrested
in
people.
General, I think the
because
answer
they
to that
obviously
is probably,
weren't fine with it.
But I'm sure that there are probably some circumstances, especially with people that are just there and not taking up space,
He
and
is
they're
literally just lying.
talking and not really like obstructing anyone, not setting up encampments, and they're just there. Yeah, I would think that's really kind of fucked up for them to remove them for that reason.
Yeah, so you can only have a right to protest so far as you hold a sign saying what you believe in,
because it had been going on for multiple days, and
you hold a sign saying,
like, I mean, let's be real, who really gives a fuck about
that's a protest that Asmongold says that is constitutionally protected,
but they are.
But you do anything else, he says too far, kill them,
destroying a lot of things. Like I see windows getting knocked out in multiple different places.
I don't think there were any windows knocked out at UCLA. You might be confusing that with Columbia, and the only windows that were knocked out.
That's what I was saying in multiple places. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay, so Columbia University, they broke into Hamilton Hall to take it over, which is, again, I will defend that as well. I have defended that. I think that's perfectly valid.
Because
like,
I don't know.
Trespassing. It's trespassing, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not just trespassing. It's like breaking, like you're breaking the windows to trespass, right? It's one thing like, oh, we just walked in.
So material damage to facilities.
Yeah, thank you, Hassan.
Yeah, material damage to facilities is like is an injustice, is what you're saying here in this situation. Which I think, you might have that opinion.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah, it absolutely
okay,
is.
So then don't you think that the university's reaction by sending thousands, using millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars, and sending in thousands of cops to break every door inside of Hamilton Hall and most of the windows outside of Hamilton Hall caused an infinite more amount of material damage than just simply meeting the students halfway at the bargaining table?
Yeah.
I completely agree with it. And the reason why is because it's their property to damage, and they have every right to do that. And the law has to be upheld to a degree.
But doesn't that mean that, like, the university kind of doesn't give a shit about the material harm in that circumstance?
True.
Because if they cared about what happened,
he's like, dog, it's their property. I care so much about property damage, but it is their property to damage.
It's about having the autonomy of the material harm and being able to decide what you do with your own material and what you do with your own property and what you don't do with it. And I think this is not somebody operating in good faith. And it's worth more, and it's more important than any actual material or piece of property in itself. It's the essence that somebody has their own autonomy to decide what they do with what they own.
Because one of the things that they also did at Columbia was falsely claim that like these students were actually harming and being anti-Semitic and like scaring Jewish students, even though ironically they don't care about Jewish students were overrepresented in those arrested in the first sweep. So once again, it's the university.
Hassan is still operating to
action must be met, like police action must occur upon these students.
I'm gonna be real,
because they have made up a fake reason, a bullshit reason.
He literally said, "I care about it because the students are breaking property," and Hassan was like, the university also broke population
and threatening them.
It's their right to break property.
Evidence existed for that.
How do you argue with somebody who says that?
Far greater harm to the student population, because then they violently assaulted and arrested hundreds of students.
That's the only thing he understands.
So it's like, it's a bit of a I'm cutting my nose to spite my face situation, don't you think?
But it's their face to cut, and it's their decision
not really.
to make.
Well,
it really is, because it's their right, it's their business, or not business, I guess you could say. But it's their university.
No, universities are a business for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that in some cases you're probably right. And I think also, like, a lot of the people that were being violently arrested, I think it takes two to tango in a lot of cases. And I think a lot of these people are being violently arrested, but they're also not complying with what the police are wanting. They're actively breaking the law. And I don't think that's something like, how do you, like,
so you bring up a really good point.
Like, well, like, how do you deal with a person that is actively resisting you and won't obey the law? Because I feel like, how do you deal with a person who you're trying to brutalize, and they put their hands up and be like,
actually bring up a really good point that I love this conversation. This is not a gotcha at all. Have you ever been arrested?
No, I have not.
Okay, so I have.
I've been pulled over. I've been, like, detained, but I've never been arrested.
Yeah, so I have. And this is not, I promise you, it's not a gotcha at all. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because So resisting arrest is what is known as like a tack-on charge. Because cops oftentimes, I'm sure you've seen like body camera footage. Well, they'll be like, "Oh, stop resisting," while they literally have like their knee on the neck of a suspect already.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? That's on the ground. And it's technically a bullshit charge, and here's why: because getting handcuffed,
it was consistent. I will say,
like physical restriction.
You know what I mean, it was consistent.
It's actually done in such a way that your body cannot contort
from some form
in that way. So your body naturally reacts when your arms are behind your back and you're being placed in handcuffs.
It's literally his entire perspective is operating under the boundaries that the way that society works cannot be flawed in any sort of way, and any sort of resistance to the way that society is operating or functioning is inherently immoral, because society itself is inherently good, right? That's it, right? That's it. That's the main way that he's operating from, right? It's society itself is morally good and just, right? And so any resistance to that is morally unjust inherently. Therefore, when like universities decide to break their windows, they're just, because that's how society works. They own the property, right? But when students do it, even though theoretically their tuition dollars are going to fund that same building, they're unjust because society says so, right? This is why I always go back to that Brandon Lee Mulligan quote: laws are threats, and you only have as many rights as the hegemonic power, as the overarching system, the government itself says you have, despite what they write down. You know what I mean?
And another charge that they're using in UCLA.
I'll pull up the video again. I think it's
right? Because like, you know, I think that there are a lot of instances where somebody is resisting arrest, and it's not because of a body contortion reason. They're running away from police or trying to push them away. I mean, you can't have that. I mean,
shut up, Osmongold. We're listening to the king.
I don't know what you kids are up to, but I do know one thing: laws are threats made by the dominant socioeconomic ethnic group in a given nation. It's just a promise of violence that's enacted, and police are basically an occupying army. You know what I mean?
True. Exactly.
In Germany, it is technically not illegal to try to escape prison. Did you know this?
Nah, this is what I'm here for.
No, I didn't know that.
This is what I'm here for.
Under the German understanding of human law, they believe that obviously all men want freedom. So it is a perfectly natural and perfectly valid response to being apprehended and being put in prison. So technically, when you do try to escape prison in Germany, if you do actually escape prison in Germany, the only
he's going to say, oh, that's because the German law says that. And the German law says that that's fine. You know what I mean? But the American law doesn't say that. So it's bad to escape prison. You know what I mean?
You obviously try to escape prison, like that's a charge in and of itself. In Germany, they don't even have that. They don't consider that to be an additional offense to add on to your record, because they consider that to be the natural predisposition of humans, that they want to be free. It's just the reason why I brought it up is because like a lot of laws are designed around the culture and whatever our material conditions are, whatever we want the criminal justice system to do. And that is precisely the reason why the application of like things such as trespassing or things such as like lawful dispersal are oftentimes simply charges that we've created.
I mean, that's kind of how we arrived here, right? Like the right to protest. Constitutionally constitutionally protected right to protest.
Don't like what you're saying. But that doesn't change the reality.
That doesn't say you can only protest with what's legal, right? It says you have a right to protest. You feel me? What's moral and totally just. Like you can only protest in this specific way. It doesn't say that.
I don't, because like there are a lot of instances where they're trying to arrest somebody and the person is actively trying to fight them and stop them from arresting them.
Yes, you have to look at why they're there in the first place.
Acceptable. Like, wouldn't that massively endanger the...
Okay, if police walked into your house right now and tried to arrest you and you tried to fight back and then they killed you for resisting arrest, would that not be a problem? You can't make up a scenario like, okay, but what if they were unjust? You know what I mean? What if they were trying to fight back or whatever? The police can say whatever they want to.
massive risks of violence against police officers.
To get into a philosophical
It's the
argument and
application of the
conversation,
law.
in my opinion, I agree.
I think that there should be probably a higher standard
I agree.
for things such as this, because obviously, like,
there's only 3 questions we need to ask.
As long as it's not violent,
only
as long as it's not like genuinely causing harm to others,
right?
I think that a trespass
Number
law in this situation, especially because it is public land,
right?
Trespass in this circumstance is, in my opinion, not meeting the
think
standard of violent state apprehension. If it was something else, if these students were like beating the shit randomly out of like students that are walking around, then, well, you have a specific charge for that, right?
Yeah,
I think that trespass is just a bullshit one to use in this circumstance, especially after the vice chancellor,
what do you think
hours prior to the sweep, actually went and sat down with the students. And in
are you
that
talking
conversation,
about in UCLA?
yeah, and the vice chancellor made it seem as though they were doing this to protect the students. They were claiming that you know, they wanted police presence there to protect the students, and the students kept asking him whether there would be a sweep at all, because police presence in this circumstance would not actually mean safety for the students or security for the students, but the exact opposite. And he basically said, oh no, there won't be a sweep, or maybe there will be a sweep, but you'll be able to leave before the sweep, giving them only one.
Right? I don't care what we're talking about right now. These are only 3 questions. Only 3 questions I need to know from Asmongold. Do you think there's a genocide happening in Palestine? If so, what would you do? What do you think you should do about it? You know what I mean? And would it not be moral to do everything in your power to oppose the genocide if you believed it was happening? That's the only answer I need from Asmongold. The only answer I need from Asmongold are an answer to these 3 questions.
Can't make them leave. They are effectively
right, because his answer to all these 3 questions will literally tell us.
I mean, the spaces they're occupying is marginal. They could even hold an actual space hostage, I guess, like if they were to go inside of a building and set up barricades and whatnot.
But I need them to,
at which point, what I care about is what their goals are, right? Because all matter of protest
because you
is
cannot
inevitably
go through
going
these
to
3 questions
inevitably going to be disruptive
without coming to
that's why
without like specifically laying out what you think. You know what I mean? You can be like, oh, I think Palestinians, you know, are being hurt. You know what I mean? I do think that Israel's doing a moral injustice, and I do think that we shouldn't be using our tax dollars. You can say all these things, right? But until you ask yourself, or until you answer the question, do you think there's a genocide going on? Right? Until you answer your question, if you think there's genocide going on, what do you think we should do about it, right? Because if you say, no, there's no genocide, we know what you think, right? If you say, yes, there's a genocide, but we should do nothing, we know what you think, right? If you say, yes, there's a genocide, yes, we should do something, right? But we should only do something as it, you know, fits within this very specific framework of legality, we know what you think.
That still didn't stop them. That's why you see images of like deans
of like that lady.
Yeah, you see images everywhere of like there was a.
That's my point.
There was a lady who is the head of Jewish studies at one of the universities that literally was physically assaulted by the police. She's a Jewish woman. She's a professor. She's the head of the Jewish cultural studies.
Oh, Hassan. She pointed at them.
Out of her for saying that like Israel is doing a genocide. I don't think that any of these. I guess like the thing
to him would
that
be irrational
annoys me the most about this stuff and the way that it's covered in mainstream media is the hypocrisy of it all. Beyond the obvious issues, beyond my own personal perspective on the matter, beyond the fact that I think it's truly unconscionable that our tax dollars are going to fund and facilitate ruthless baby slaughter overseas instead of, you know, helping Americans, helping people
here,
helping homeless people here.
I agree with you in that perspective.
Beyond that fact, the idea that these guys are somehow doing this to,
I will say, sorry, this is not about this conversation. Literally, all Scalooey's clip is literally like bait. You know what I mean? It's like bait. It's literally I put the clip out there. It's a 10-second clip. It just people feed off of that.
It's all bullshit. Like the reasoning that the media
I can
gives
farm
is
this clip
bullshit.
for the next
justifications
like
that universities give is ultimately bullshit. They just don't want this kind of protest to occur. They just don't want it at all.
With the same caption too.
Shut the fuck up.
Don't argue with this moron. This is the only valid response
Israel
about anybody. It doesn't have to be about Osmoco specifically.
And that you should make no demands from the university whatsoever. And
Well, I think that the university isn't, at liberty to be held accountable by anybody who wants to get together and hold them accountable, even if it's students.
It's
Like,
their
I
their
agree with you
money.
that, like, all of these things are
They're
bad.
paying
But
tuition.
just
Why
because
would they
something
not?
is bad, that doesn't necessarily greenlight any behavior you take in order to hold somebody accountable for it. So, like, while I think that it's absolutely fair for the students to want to,
It's
protest
literally
to make
their money.
the university divest or, not be involved with those things. Absolutely, that's fair.
Bro,
But
me and
whenever
Fizz
you
are
do
going
it in
through
a
it,
way
dog.
that
Me and
the
Fizz are
university
going
doesn't want
through
you
it.
to, I think that yes, they have every right to have you removed because that's the way the law works. And I think that's what I would say if it was a Walmart doing this or a Starbucks or a person at their house or
Yeah, because you're
anything.
stupid.
Because again, a person should have autonomy and the right to
'Cause you're
decide what they
dumb.
do with their own space. And also, it's not like the protesters are
please,
speaking for every
please
student.
ask him.
There are a lot of students that
Ask
probably
him.
are, like kind of neutral about the topic
Ask
or
him
might
about the
even
civil rights
disagree with
movement.
it.
I
Would
beg
it shock you
you.
to find
I beg,
out, and
not
I know
because it would
that
be
this is,
productive,
like,
but
not
just because it would
something
be
that mainstream
so
media
funny to
covers
see
at
him
all.
get mad.
But for example, students
Ask him about the civil rights movement.
Student hold
Please.
votes.
Please.
Like student government body will
Please.
hold votes for divestment. In Colombia,
Sure.
90% of the student body voted in favor of divestment. 90% in Columbia University. So it's actually not about democracy. It's the exact opposite.
I think this is something
It is
Well,
not meeting the demands of the students
The reason
or
why?
the interests of
Because
the
he's a
students
grifter.
whatsoever. As I'm sure many students, much like yourself, would probably
a
agree
grifter. Asmongold is a
that
grifter.
it
He
is
does not
kind of
care.
ridiculous that we're, participating. Our tuition dollars are going to like baby murder machine, right? And
I do.
for the record, historically, the reason why I brought up like 1968 and many
Sure.
other instances, because in 1985 specifically, Columbia University students and students across the board, across the United States of America, originally did the BDS movement and did the exact same things, if not more violent at that time, as a matter of fact, and successfully were able to get their universities to concede to the reasonable demands that they were making, which was to divest from apartheid South Africa. That's the history that these students are relying on, and they're hoping.
You already admitted that he'll lie
understandably
to
so,
avoid an argument.
that these institutions.
Oh, right. I sent this in chat. Hassan didn't click on it because Hassan hates black people. Here. This is the only relevant part of the conversation.
At the stream, I was talking about there were a lot of people who were not happy that I compared the Andrew Tate thing. I used like an example of the government framing somebody as like MLK, right? Martin Luther King. And I used that example and I said that chances of the government framing him were like 50%. Both of these two things were stupid to say and they're not true. And people said this a bunch of times.
None of that matters. This is the point.
Everybody said it was fucking stupid. And I fucking hate having to go on and say that I was wrong. I fucking hate it. I almost never do it. I will find little ways how I wasn't wrong and how it was different. But I was fucking, it was stupid. I shouldn't have said it. That's all there is to it.
I'm tweeting this. Can somebody download this for me and put it in the Discord, please? But only start from this part.
Bunch of times. Everybody said it was fucking stupid. And I fucking hate. And I
start from like second 25. Download it and put it in Discord for me, please. Thank you.
No,
Truth is,
they're hypocritical for sure.
Oh, absolutely. But it's still their right to be hypocritical. And
Right.
I'm not, and I think this is like kind of two different conversations, and we could be talking a bit past each other, but I
Okay,
think
no
that
work.
really
I will unmod you, Sarah, immediately. Don't think I won't. I hold all the power here.
I do agree with the sense that what they're doing is hypocritical, and I also think that it's bad. I think that they're wrong. I just think that it's important that people have the right to do what they want to do, and they can't be intimidated or bullied into doing what a mob of people tells them to do. I think that's extremely scary, and that's worse than almost anything else.
Oh my
Wait,
goodness.
really? You would prefer
goodness.
rather that like
Yeah,
because the
let
difference
Palestinians die. How
between
about that?
the majority, the tyranny of majority, is the tyranny of minority. So you're saying you prefer the tyranny of minority to the tyranny of majority?
Yeah, so he's
The
democracy.
tyranny of majority is democracy,
He
right?
hates democracy. Thank you. That's
let's
actually a
think
good point.
about this a little bit more logically. So I see what you're saying, and that's an interesting point, but I don't think it really applies here because, for example, if a lot of people are around like some sort of I don't know, grocery store, and there's more people that want to get the food out of the grocery store than the people that, work at the grocery store, then you would have a majority of people that you could logically say, based off of democracy, should be able to do that. But the truth is that it's not tyranny of the majority or the minority. It's tyranny of the people who have the rights and the ownership of what they have those rights and ownership to, and their autonomy to decide what they.
This part, he's so stupid.
It's neither.
It doesn't make sense.
I'm a little confused by your example because in this circumstance, it's like outsiders. Like the example that you're using would actually be best explained with strikes, right? Because what you're the analog here is actually grocery store workers.
He's correct. Hassan, this is actually good framing again.
And work at the grocery.
I don't know what Hassan says doesn't do debate. This is actually a very decent framing as well.
Are a part of, let's say, some kind of collective bargaining, some kind of union.
Yeah, something.
Decide that they are generating a shit ton of profits for the Walmart family, the Waltons, right? And they're saying, I think we want.
I know.
What's up?
Oh, I worked at Sam's Club for a week, and in orientation, they even had things on the wall saying how bad unions were.
Oh yeah,
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's not relevant at all. A week. Don't let chat. He's trying to distract you. That is a very clear distraction. He's trying. Chat. Don't bite the bullet. He's trying to distract you. He's trying to distract you from the topic of conversation. For him being like, oh well, Asmongold is so out of touch. That's not what we're talking about, right? There's a reason why he said what he said. All right. There is a reason why he said what he said.
Or Walmart would potentially stop people from going into Walmart,
you guys are
which
so
has historically been done.
You will fall for any right-wing framing.
Not just Walmart, but it's been done time and time again. And these examples of protest are disruptive at the time and possibly even very annoying for those who just want to get their fucking food and get the fuck out. And they don't want to think about it. But ultimately, movements like this have...
Also, I just want to say, Grimlow cannot decide what game he wants to play. I see him popping up on my under my Steam notifications. It's like Grimlow is now playing God of Weapons. Grimlow is now playing God of Weapons. Grimlow is now playing Helldivers. Grimlow is now playing God of Weapons. I'm like, dog, please just pick a game. Pick a game.
The reason why I am on board with these students is not is not because they're like doing unimaginably peaceful protest, like much better in a much better way than I would ever be able to do it.
You're using an argument of basically the ends justify the means, right? Is that? Yeah, you are. And I understand
but only because like the ultimate goal is one that I agree with and I think is just, and I think you think is just as well.
No.
And that's what I think is scary though, right? Because once you create a foundation where that type of thinking is justified, then who's to stop people who disagree with you and want to do something bad for thinking and applying the same type of logic? And that's what I think is scary, because I think you're right.
But that already exists. That is how most people approach matters.
Chat, would I tell you I am a literal genius? I'm a literal genius. Literally, what is question number 3, chat? Would it not be moral to do everything in your power to oppose a genocide if you believe it was happening? Question number 3.
Whether or not it's justifiably okay to break the law for this cause. I think that's very unfair, and I think also
that's not true though. What you're saying is actually not correct.
Because he cannot think it's a genocide and not think that it's moral to do everything in your power to oppose it. That's it. This is why I need these 3 questions answered. You cannot answer these 3 questions and then sit on the fence like Asmon is doing
at the protest. So like leniency is exactly how the criminal justice system applies the means testing, I guess. And the reason for why they did that is because these guys were lawfully protesting and exercising their First Amendment rights.
They weren't doing anything wrong. Number one, like the people here at UT were doing nothing wrong. They should have never been apprehended.
Yeah,
there's no reason.
But the government didn't. I mean, the university didn't want them there, Asmon. The university called the police on them, Asmon. So is it the fact that they are not doing anything wrong, or is it the fact that the universities have a right to their property, Asmon? You can't have both takes, Asmon.
Peaceful demonstration. The major purpose here of sending
You can literally not hold both positions.
Is not actually to.
That he's trying to hold right now.
This is what is like, on principle alone, anti-American, in my opinion. If we are to believe the First Amendment is real and true and enshrined and protected by the Constitution, which is probably one of my favorite things about America, considering that I came from Turkey, and a lot of the shit that I say about the American government or even the Turkish government, as a matter of fact, would lead me in serious criminal punishment in Turkey, my nation of origin.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there.
So that's why when I see stuff like this, when I see the state acting in this way, when I see the state like designing new bills that say like criticism of Israel is inherently anti-Semitic and should be illegal.
That's the one from today.
Yeah, when I see stuff like that, I am.
So I want to know what Asmongold thinks should be done. He's like, yeah, that bill sucks. Anyway, we can't do anything about it now. Shrug. Right. But Asmon, if you think that bill is bad and draconian and un-American and unconstitutional, what do you think should be done about it?
I think maybe the difference is that I view these, like, in this circumstance, those two examples are both on the spectrum of not good or bad things. But you're absolutely right that the Israel thing, where you can't criticize Israel or say that people are working for Israel, it's fucking ridiculous. Like, it's astonishing
what do you think we should do
then?
That
it's even considered.
So the question, I guess, is how do we resist against that, right?
Thank you.
And I think the reason why the founding fathers enshrined the First Amendment in the Constitution was specifically because there should be healthy dissent against the government in order to stop the government from being tyrannical, from behaving in a tyrannical way, which is precisely the reason why I think that the UCLA students are totally in the right, and the university, instead of taking them seriously and trying to,
what is his answer,
trying to mediate the situation in the same way that other colleges have, seeking the rabid dogs of the state that fucking take that cost LA taxpayers $2 to $8 million. $2 to $8 million a day. When, let me tell you, okay, you get your fucking shit stolen out here, they're gonna be like, lol, okay, write a report, okay, and give it to your fucking insurance. It is it's the entitlement and the lack of interest in actually doing your job that really frustrates me about, especially Los Angeles Police Department. You and I both know two different people that have had their car stolen that the police did nothing about. Both Ludwig and Myth got their car stolen, and in both cases, the LAPD said, "Lol, sorry."
Let's collaborate.
But then they have the capacity to fucking send thousands of Los Angeles Sheriff Department dudes.
Well, I totally forgot what we're talking about. You know what I mean? Did he answer the question? Did Asmongold answer the question? Of what do you think we should do?
That are sitting in a fucking protest,
or is Hassan still yapping?
And they're getting brutally taken down by like.
Man, it would have been such a good clip if I said what I said, and then Hassan said what he said, and then Asmongold could answer immediately after, and he's like, "We should do nothing." It would be a perfect clip. But now Hassan's been yapping for too long, and now the clip is over, and now it's been like 2 minutes.
Funds, and as a taxpayer,
to the point where I was saying L. Ludwig for getting his car stolen because I totally forgot what the topic of conversation was.
Or I wish that, I demand more from I demand more of a return from the taxes that I pay for, and I think it's my honest American right.
I love Hassan. You know what I mean?
Just like it's the right for these students to protest.
Like, man, does he yap?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. You can demand that as much as you want. But that doesn't mean you can go somewhere and just post up there and expect for people to just have to be okay with it. Like, I agree with you that the cops are probably. Like, there are a lot of cases where the cops are incompetent, but like the dichotomy that you're creating between, like,
my attention span is very short.
Police officers arresting the protesters and not getting the people who stole Myth or Ludwig's car. Like, in my opinion, I think they should do both, because if you don't have law and you don't have rule of law and you can't apply the law, then everything is chaos.
He didn't even answer the question of what do we think we should do.
Well, I think the police. I think the police were behaving in an unlawful way by going into a otherwise peaceful encampment and beating people and apprehending them. That's what I'm saying. I think it's a violation of the First Amendment to do so.
I think that it's. Well, like, you don't view it as like, for example, like if somebody went onto your property, and I understand this is a public university, so it's different. But I do believe that going on to somebody's property and refusing to leave, is violent.
They're
It
paying
is
to be
fundamentally violent.
there.
Like, you're not allowing
It's
somebody
their
to access or
tuition.
to use part of their property
What
that
are we
they own.
talking
Yeah,
about?
but
Like, that
this
is-
being different
I
is
feel like-
important though, because there's a difference between personal property, like your house or whatever, versus
Sure.
public property of a school that you are actually paying tuition to utilize the
Thank
grounds
you.
on. Like it's
Thank you.
entirely different.
Very different.
That's why there's
Super
public
different
spaces to
things.
begin with, so that people can protest in places like that, in parks and whatnot. So I guess the question I had for you at this point is, like, 1968, Vietnam War and civil rights protests are happening. They're much more violent ultimately than these
Goalposts
this
successfully
round of
moved, and
protests
question
that are occurring in
unsuccessfully
college
answered.
campuses.
So,
Like,
no chance he plays Walking
you
Dead
at the
tonight.
end of
It's
the day
8:20. Good luck.
agree with the
You know what? I'll play
ultimate
Walking Dead for
solutions
you,
that
chat.
occurred,
I'm lying.
right?
I
Like
will not
ending
play
the
Walking
Vietnam
Dead.
War.
Well, that's
and
really the thing, right? Is that so like I can see where you're going, and you can
Is that the public is
like, kind
allowed?
of like redirect
the
it
encampment, the
if it's
administration
not.
is allowed, and the
But,
encampment, fire marshals are allowed,
like,
and the encampment only
basically, my
agitators are
perspective
not
is that
allowed.
I do agree with you on doing those things, but
Asmongold
I think
is
that if you use
wait.
the argumentation of the ends justify the means, I think that can be used in a lot of ways that are extremely harmful. And I think that also they can always be used in very hypocritical ways, where the ends justify
and
the
they're
means in
invalid.
things that I agree with, or you agree with, or somebody else agrees with.
It is a
but
slippery
not
slope
in
fallacy.
cases where other people
100%.
don't agree with it. And that's why I think that the only way to have
Very nice
any
TV. Thank
sort
you for
of
the
a
raid.
stable
Welcome in, Raiders.
society
Hello, hello.
is to
I'm so
have
sorry
an
for
official set
subjecting
of
you to
rules
this,
that
but
everybody has to go off of. And if
when
you
there's
start
brain rot
going
happen,
off of
I got
that,
a
or,
brain. Can I turn
like
ads off?
diverging from that,
This is my normal stream time. We don't
everything
need any
becomes
ads for this.
chaos, and everybody starts inventing their own rules, and you have
So he admitted,
situations like what's been happening.
against the civil rights
And I
movement
think it's worse
and
for everybody.
and the
Like you said, it's
anti-Vietnam War
millions of
movement.
dollars that gets costs. And I think the truth is that if you want to change things, there is a democratic process to change things. And with the university, people do have freedom
but
of
you did say
association.
that the democratic process cannot is not going to work either in the state, in the case of Colombia, right?
Well, that's because it's not a democracy. But people can deal with it in a way that is democratic, which is simply choosing not to go there. So if people don't like what
What?
Colombia is doing, they can choose not to go to Colombia. So I don't really see the problem here. Why does Colombia have to, agree with these people or bow down to them if these people don't even need to be there?
So that's
Yeah,
a great
like,
question.
if your two options are
and
join or
the
die,
best
you don't
answer
have any
perhaps
options,
comes from James
Asmon.
Baldwin, American writer and civil rights activist, who once famously said, and I don't want to paraphrase this, so I'm going to give you the actual quote here. He said, "I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." This is the exact same answer that
See, Hassan, that's a black person. You think Asmongold listens to black people?
hater of America. Now,
Sorry,
the
I just
reason
have to do
why
it. It's kind of funny.
I have the financial freedom.
This is effectively the same quote as like I don't agree with what you're saying, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. So I agree with you. I think so, but I don't think all types of criticism are the same. So yeah, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, no. What I was trying to point to here with this quote is that
So again, chat, again, we arrive at question number 1. Literally, these are the perfect 3 questions, chat. These are the perfect 3 questions.
have had people who believe that their cause is righteous and their cause is just, and that their means,
So he poses the quote. He said
actually,
yes.
their ends justify their means, right? Their methods of protest. And that is, I'm thankful, I guess, for people of the past for demonstrating the courage against the state apparatus that violently chooses to suppress them, so that I can live in a country where, or I can live in a world.
Fizz comes in, drops a take every now and then
to bring us all of the amenities and all the freedoms that we now take for granted, whether it
It's
be
a great place to be.
Yeah, whether it be the American Revolution early on, which was a bourgeois revolution altogether, and there's still a lot of faults in America, but America shows a lot of promise, which it fails to meet on a regular basis. But ultimately, I choose to live here, right? And it is because
I love America. I think America's great. Yeah, I
it is
totally agree with
because
you.
But if you protest, you should be beaten within an inch of your life, Asmon says. Thank you very much, Asmongold.
hostile about
Yeah.
things that you don't believe in. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Which is why I think it's which is why I think it's wrong that the state acted in the way that it did in this circumstance. And not only is it wrong, but I also think it's hypocritical that they acted this way. This doesn't mean that, like, for example, you know, in a hypothetical, like if a school shooter is fucking barricading himself into a school and holding a bunch of children hostage, that like, I don't expect the state to be violent. You know what I mean? Of course, I expect this. I expect them to not do what they did at Uvalde. I expect them to do to be as militant as they are against like a blue-haired queer English major at UCLA.
Right.
Except they don't do that, but that's besides the point. That's not. There's a whole different. That opens up a whole different litany of problems.
Lily, what's up?
So I'm simply stating that in order for the state to react this way, I think there needs to be a bar. There needs to be a bar. There needs to be a standard, in my opinion. And that standard was certainly not met in this circumstance. And it's not just because the ends justify the means, but that does play a role in it, because I do think that they're like, I'm going to be intellectually honest and not act like I'm taking no stances here. I do agree with this cause. I do agree with the cause of the students. But beyond that, I think that their methods overall were of a peaceful nature. And I think that the school reacting in this way by sending in the cops to brutally arrest these kids was genuinely fucked up. Like really fucked up.
Where do you think that bar is?
And scary as well. What do I think that bar is? I think I think when you do actually engage in direct acts of violence, it makes your cause definitely a lot less palatable to many others.
You don't view like blocking access or trespassing as a direct act of violence?
No, I mean, definitionally, under the legal code, trespass is not considered a violent act.
Oh yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah,
why'd you ask the question?
I don't agree that, like,
what a leading question. That's insane.
Can be, however.
Yes,
he said, you don't think that trespassing is an act of violence? And Hassan was like, no, it's not. And he's like, you're right. You are. That was a quiz. I got you. Like, why would you do that?
Right. Like, to the best of their ability, which is precisely the reason why, like, I guess it's like what these guys were doing is, in some ways, even though their cause is just, and I agree with their methods, and I probably would defend them if they were way worse than they are currently for that reason. I'm being very honest here. In this circumstance, especially,
just checking if paying attention. Just checking if paying attention.
Students setting up an encampment and not allowing like random people who are like very obviously there to agitate, with the exception of like students that are genuinely, honestly, and earnestly trying to lend their support, was for good reason, so that they don't have like random fucking Nazis showing up at their doorstep and saying a whole bunch of like fucked up things that would put.
I really want to like somebody to ask him about like the civil rights sit-ins that happened, where people were literally occupying private businesses, right, and were sitting there until they were served,
putting the Jewish students at that encampment in harm's way. So I think that I guess the comparison is kind of like,
I was thinking for the followers chat, where are you guys coming from?
On that courtyard having a picnic, right? Just because you're a student, that would not give you the right to like step on the picnic while they're having a meal as a family.
Well, let's use the picnic analogy, right? And like, so if the picnic lasts for 6 days, do you think the university should have a right to tell the picnic people to leave?
I don't think the picnic would last because at that point it would be something different than a picnic.
Right? I mean, at a certain point, like, I do think that they do have the right to get rid of them. Like, I agree with you, right?
Well, I don't think the university.
I think there's a limit.
No, you're absolutely right. The difference is,
it's great.
There have been demonstrations such as that in times past in many other college campuses, and more often than not, they just kind of wait it out and have people leave, or they're like, all right, what the fuck is going on? And they could have, UCLA could have reacted in the same exact way that other colleges have reacted, like I mentioned,
right,
and tried
sitting at
to find
university
a
office.
amicable
Samuel L.
and
Jackson
peaceful solution
held a
instead
gun
of
to
actually
university
greatly
administration
escalating
officials
to violent means by
at
utilizing
gunpoint. The actor.
the police force and greatly putting students in danger of physical violence.
I was talking about the
Well, I think
Greensboro.
the
That's my
students put
main anger
themselves-
here.
I get that. I think the students put themselves in danger. They were told by the cops to leave and they didn't do it. It's not their property. They weren't allowed to be on there. They were told to leave. They didn't leave.
I think it was morally justified if somebody occupies Asmongold's house.
Like, I mean, these aren't children, right? These are
Greensboro
adults,
sit-in
and
style,
they're
baby.
smart people that are going to this college in a lot of the circumstances. They know exactly
Somebody
what
should
the
Greensboro sit in
ramifications of
Asmongold's
their
house. Shout out
actions
North
are.
Carolina.
So
Actually,
this is
actually
why-
went to North Carolina A&T. Okay, enough of that.
that is
Depression.
great.
Okay, so I guess the question, like I
Don't
said,
tell Hassan to
with
ask about this. He won't.
1968 and whatnot, is that like
Hassan has his own thing.
I don't think you would like as far as all the protests that have happened in the
His own-
past,
his
like
own
the
line of
1985
argumentation.
anti-apartheid protests.
Yeah.
Similar
'Cause, like, I mean,
counters
he's
were
asking. He's bringing up the
similar-
literal the exact same protests that happened in 1968 and 1985. So if those don't make him understand, I don't think a sit-in with black people is going to make him understand. Chat. You know what I mean?
doesn't simply offer people nice things because of the kindness of their hearts. People have to demand those nice things.
Well, you have
And-
to vote for them, really.
Yeah, well, that too for sure. But sometimes it goes beyond voting because sometimes the state will refuse what you voted for democratically, and will say no, we're not going to do it. So
Well, did he say just
I guess
vote?
the question is
I missed
always
it.
like, what is
what's
to
the
be done?
non-genocide
Like,
option,
what are people
Asmon?
supposed to do? Because
Thank you.
there is
Thank you.
this
We're back. We're back.
idea- I think it was JFK who said
We're
it.
back, baby.
That like a violent retaliation to what is it? It's like I think violent
who
suppression,
make
violent suppression of peaceful
nonviolent,
action makes violent retaliation a necessity.
or something. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're saying the same thing. Like, I know what you're talking about. And so, yeah, I feel like you're definitely right. And that nonviolent action, I think, should be not going to that university. Don't go there. Vote for
What?
things and vote for people that will represent your interests in a way that's authentic and will enable you to change policy in a way that you think reflects what your views are.
Okay.
I totally agree with that. And that's what I think needs to happen much more. Because I think that a lot of people in the U.S.
Who's the
and I hear this
non-genocide
sentiment a lot,
candidate,
I find it to
Asmongold?
be very.
Who do you
Well,
vote
the
for
thing is,
that's not
it's sad,
genocidal?
but it's also kind of true.
Tell me who to vote for.
In
I
some
will write their
cases,
name on the ballot.
Is that
I
people
will
feel
write
like
them
voting
in.
doesn't work, and like voting does
Who?
work, but it should work a lot more than it does. And I think that people are just so demoralized and they're so fixated
Who?
around trying to
Tell me
like
who.
protest or
Jake?
like
Okay, you're
force
right.
UCLA to do something that they lose track of what they really, the power that people they really have is
That's
voting.
just to go back to your
We
country
can
argument.
hold people
This is
accountable.
true.
You
also,
can push for third parties,
this has a good take.
people that believe in it. And I wish that energy and that
I don't think it's that easy.
But do you think that
I
they're
think
not voting?
The American
Like-
electoral system it makes that
But does Asmongold
virtually
think that these
impossible
people
for the
who
most
are
part.
on the
what
lawns?
is the alternative?
I think the alternative is making through pressure, through public
Oh, he
pressure,
turned it back
by
around?
way of like
He didn't even give an alternative.
causing some level of
was
material
just like,
harm in the
"Come on,
form
guys,
of
let's vote."
strikes and labor militancy, as we have done historically in the past, is to organize on the boundaries of community, organize on the boundaries of labor, and make demands from at least one side of the political duopoly that they cannot ignore. And that is at the heart of protest movements like this. That's why I am fully in support of protest movements like this, because the reality of the matter is active lobbying
Asmon
efforts
is right.
from corporations and the very powerful,
just
very wealthy
vote
individuals
for
in this society have rendered American democracy useless. There are so many instances where
just
there's like tremendous
voted for
injustices that are occurring all around us that virtually every American would probably agree on,
candidate
that
instead
seemingly get
of
no
protesting
solutions from our
Jim
elected
Crow.
representatives. The system is designed
That's
as it
kind of what I
stands
was
currently.
talking about.
Yeah, but that's why I'm saying like it's not just about
As in,
it,
right, we
it,
should
it
have
can't be
just
just
voted
about
for the
democracy because that's the
segregation candidate
expectation,
instead of
or
protest-
rather
protest.
Didn't say it can't be just about democracy.
Jim
This
Crow.
is about more democracy, right? To
Yeah.
make
VIP
your
loophole?
elected
Yeah.
represent your interests rather than the interests of the wealthy few. And in order to get there, you do actually have to
VIP
go to the streets
loophole.
sometimes. You do actually have to show them.
It'll be funny if
No, you can't fucking
for the
do
people
that.
who wouldn't hear
It's
the chat,
ridiculous.
I just turned on emote only mode in here too, so you can't say anything here either. So then you would leave, so that wouldn't be funny.
Like you can look at somebody like Bernie Sanders, right? You were a big supporter of Bernie Sanders. I also like Bernie Sanders. Like the amount of money that he was getting versus, you know, a lot of the people that he was going against was like nothing compared to them. But at the same time,
I mean, he got a lot of money from individual donors, especially.
I mean, compared to the bigger candidates, I mean,
Yeah, because they were astroturfed. They were funded by
PACs.
billionaires.
Yeah, of course. I
Like-
mean, it's
Yeah,
always
but
going to be
He's a socialist.
easily billionaires are going to have a much easier time, you know, dumping a $100 million of super PAC than like 100 million Americans giving $1. So yeah,
$1, yeah, of course.
yeah,
Well, that's what
grassroots
I'm
is
saying,
always
right?
much
And so
harder.
I think the strength of the message is something that also is important. And I think if there's a strong enough message, people will believe in it and people will push it. I mean, you know, we're the same age, right? So like you remember Obama, right? I mean, that was a very strong message and people believed in that and they acted on it. And I think that it'll happen again too whenever people
Yeah, but Obama
remember.
was ultimately
Yeah,
Obama ran on
people didn't
ending
think that.
closing Guantanamo
ways.
Bay and like
Yeah.
ran against the Iraq War and then was responsible for the troop surge and like the continuation of the Iraq War, right? So like and
Promise
the
change his mind. I understand.
so my point is like
I said, how many Palestinians will die while we are just voting?
your elected representatives that you voted for have told you a lie. Right?
Well, like this is the thing, right? Because like people use, for example, like you use the Revolutionary War or like the Boston Tea Party or something like that as an example of like justified violent, like basically protest. And I
Right.
agree with you. And so I think
Okay.
the question is that I think violent and like, you know, material destruction protests, like basically illegal protest, is completely justifiable if you're not able to like vent your frustrations democratically.
Okay.
And so I think the
Okay.
question is really depending on, do people have the opportunity to vent those frustrations democratically?
No.
Because like what you're saying is like,
well,
I
do you
think
think
it
they
is
have
true.
do you think they have this in this particular matter in America? Because you said
well,
why don't-
well, there's two circumstances, right? You're talking about with the schools. I think that they don't have it, and I think that they don't have the right to have it.
What?
Because it's
You
not
can't-
democratic
those are-
fundamentally.
you can't- those are
Not
incompatible
everything needs to be
beliefs.
democratic. And if you own something, it's like if 5 people outside your house
Those are
democratically
incompatible.
vote
He
that,
literally
you know, your
just
house should
said
be,
that. He
you know,
just said
everybody's
that.
house.
He
That
just
doesn't
said if you
necessarily
could
mean
not
you
vent
lose
your
your house.
frustrations
Well, I mean, if they
democratically,
paid for
you
it-
have a right through violent
if they
means.
paid for my
And
house,
Hassan
then
asked,
I think it's a
do you
whole
believe that they
different
have a right to
conversation. If they
do
didn't
things
pay for my
democratically?
house-
And he was like,
But it
no,
doesn't mean that
and they
it's a
don't have a
democracy.
right. How
No,
do you
I'm
hold
saying
these
that
positions?
If they paid for my house, that they would have a righteous say. They would have an understandable say in like, in a circumstance where like they're living in the house and they paid for the house and they're
Yeah.
basically renting. Then yeah, no, they do have a right, in my opinion, both morally and in some instances legally in what happens in the house. That's why if your landlord refuses to fix your fucking mold, for example, you do have a right. Many people don't know this. but you
Asmongold's
literally
not
do
fixing
have
his
a
mold,
right
baby. He lives in that mold.
to deny them payment, even. So, I mean, it's state by
Yeah,
state.
no, it definitely has to go both ways. But what I'm saying is that you can't do everything by tyranny of the majority. And I think that also whenever you're talking about private property, people should have the right to decide what is and what isn't like private property. And I don't think that people who own private property should, you know, be at the mercy of the majority in a lot of cases.
No, that's
And
why.
I think
well, that's why this is
Democracy.
public property. Like university campuses, especially state universities, are public property. That's actually quite literally the reason why, for example, you know those Westboro Baptist Church freaks that go to like all the college campuses and like talk about how like yell at students and call them the F slur and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Like those guys oftentimes cannot be kicked out of college campuses for this specific reason, because technically it is public property that their tax dollars are paying for.
Will he backpedal, chat? I'm curious.
It is
Or you just say, even though it's public, I don't care, I agree.
violation of First Amendment rights.
Yeah, I think that it's really about the encampment in that case, right? Because the people that were there were really getting kicked out. They weren't really getting kicked out for protesting. They were getting kicked out for having an encampment there.
Well,
So
no,
if
they
the
were getting kicked
Westboro
out for
Baptist,
protesting. They were getting kicked out for protesting. They just used.
Chat, are you sending me links to send to Hassan?
African princess.
Send it to a mod or something. I'm not sending your links to Hassan. You get your own VIP badge so you can send links. I'm not sending your links.
Third day, the counter protesters showed up in incredibly violent ways, right? And you saw that, you recognized it as well.
yeah,
Then
No,
the school.
Link wasn't bad. The link was just the JFK quote he was looking for. All right, it wasn't a bad link. It was still kind of funny though.
Do you think, what kind of lesson do you think that teaches everyone around the country, that if you want these students to shut the fuck up,
banned for us, of course,
if you're,
Katie.
if you're like a 45-year-old Zionist dude
I
who just
knew
wants
it.
to
That's why I
unconditionally
didn't open
dick
it on
ride Israel
stream.
into
I'm a genius.
oblivion, go and beat the shit out of some students, and
Get ready like a
inevitably
book,
the school
baby.
will turn around and use your violent actions against them to basically say, now the state has to come in and pack up these students themselves. So they first got beaten by the Zionist counter protesters, many of which have been identified and are not from the school at all. Then on top of that, the school used that instance to directly pack you up. Like they're because there's a reason. You can't just declare something unlawful. Like that's not how this works, right? Because like vice chancellors are voted on democratically oftentimes by the student body. And the administration at least like has to maintain a semblance of democracy, especially because it's a woke elite learning institute.
Well, Hassan keeps yapping. I keep like tuning him out. He talks for so long. I'm gonna be real. I'm gonna be honest. He talks for so long, dog.
there and they were just sitting there protesting. I think that's totally fine.
But they are.
There's nothing wrong with that.
They
I
are.
wouldn't have an issue if they were just sitting there protesting, but because they built a camp to protest continuously, that it demands violent retaliation from the force. Like it justifies violent retaliation from the state.
I think so, yeah.
So
I
it's
do.
tense. Okay.
Because
Tense
they have no right to do that. They have no right to just
police
start building and putting up tents there.
Brutality.
That's insane.
Tents. The tents are the line.
They were engaging in continued protest.
And also, like,
the tents.
well,
Tents
also
are
keep in
violence.
mind
Chat.
that
Tents
whenever
are
I'm
violence.
talking about, you're saying engaging in violent actions.
That's
like
why.
the police.
That's why homeless people, deserve to be brutalized because they live in tents.
Only thing that was left. And so it's like, does somebody have the right, again, and this is what I was saying initially, does somebody have the right to defend their property? And I think the answer is to that is absolutely.
It's not their property.
It's property
It's
the
public
students
property.
are paying for, and it's the state property too. So it's like
It's public
taxpayers,
property.
but which is
it's
why
it's the property that all of the students are paying for, not just the ones that are protesting.
Bro, the goalpost keeps moving.
Like in the case of Columbia, it is private property, and yet the students. I don't know what the UCLA student votes would.
Okay, so if you live in a house where everything is, if you live in a communist commune where everything is communally owned, you can't sleep anywhere because that sleeping space is owned by everybody. You know what I mean? You can't live in a place or in a house with your family, right? That it doesn't communal ownership because your room, well, that's everybody's room, right? You can't take up an entire space in your family's house because that's everybody's house. Do you see how stupid that is? How dumb that is? You can't even stand on campus because, hey, you're standing on that one brick on campus. Guess what? That's everybody's brick, okay? So you Rebecca, standing there on everybody's brick, you need to get off campus, right? Because that's everybody's brick. Guess what? Oh, you moved? That's also everybody's brick as well. You see how dumb that is? You see how society doesn't work that way? It doesn't.
Protesting on behalf of the majority opinion.
Yeah, but it's also not a democracy. Just because they have a student government or a student body that votes on things, it doesn't mean that the administration has to listen to what the student body votes on. So that was never part of it.
Again, chat, I bring it back. Question number 1.
Body in this circumstance, and I'm glad that they did in previous instances, like during the civil rights movement, when when students took similar actions during the Vietnam
Hello.
War
Hello.
and in the civil rights protests, where we've seen the
you ever
worst
seen
of
the-
the
from the
worst,
university?
like
I
what
think you went for,
actually
like, a year, right?
happens
Or no?
when there is resistance, like in Kent State, where they literally shot and killed
7
4
people, I think.
students.
Yeah.
Yeah, they shot and killed 4 students
Anthony Fantano.
because they did not want they didn't want
No,
this
this is somebody
fuck
else.
shit to continue. You
I
know,
thought
they were
Anthony
like, all right,
Fantano with
shut
the
the
mohawk
fuck
for
up.
some reason.
You're done. And I find that to be significantly scarier than a university, especially a state-funded university, listening to
When
the
I think-
very reasonable demands being made by their students, especially students who have followed the law almost entirely, all things considered, despite the fact that people were like attacking them relentlessly. And setting up defenses against that is also perfectly just too. Like that's why they had surrounded the encampment with like
Well,
a
they were
human
getting
chain.
attacked with the plywood, and so it makes sense. Yeah, definitely.
They were getting attacked with the plywood.
I think
what?
those are 2 separate issues, right? So, like, you're talking about, like, I agree with you that the university should do it, but I also think that they shouldn't have to. And with Kent State being shot by those, I mean, those are police officers that shot them.
National
Like,
Guard.
I think, well, okay, well, either way, right? This is the
Yeah.
government that's doing it, right? It's not like there's not some kind of like, campus police force that's,
Who called
hired
them?
privately. And so I think the problem is that whenever you're talking about something like,
Bro.
Columbia University or UCLA, people have
Come
the
on.
choice and the decision,
Come
the
on.
autonomy to decide whether they want to
Come
go to that
on.
school or not. And I think that the
Yeah.
fact that they have that right to do that means, and I think that the other counterbalance to that is
Like
that
this
it
can
means
also apply to just the government. You know what I mean? In taxes, you don't have a right to protest the government because of taxes, because guess what? They shouldn't have to listen to you.
So
I
here's
do-
the thing, though. Like
They're a private
like
entity.
they could just choose to go to another school. Okay.
yeah,
Most schools are in some way, shape, or form using their endowments to and also using their research to fund and facilitate Israel's apartheid, right? So let's say you transfer from UCLA to UC Berkeley. Okay, well they're doing that too. What are you supposed to do? Well, you set up an encampment. Okay. Well, now the school doesn't want you to set up an encampment. What are you supposed to do? Let's say you leave UC Berkeley, then you go to Stanford. Well, similar situation exists there. It exists in almost every single institution.
This is actually good argumentation as well.
there's a lot of cases where that happens, but I don't think that they are obligated to adhere to anybody's demands. They're not obligated to do that.
No one is obligated, which is why like concessions never come without leverage, which is precisely the reason why I think like, especially when students are following the letter of the law in their protests, in their protests, I'm fully unconditionally in support of it, especially
And
because
I
there's
am
no
too.
other option in this circumstance, no other option beyond, like, I guess, like I said, all forms
don't allow
of
free
peaceful
speech?
resistance
No,
being met
they
with
don't.
violent ends
Because
from
you
the
don't have
state
rights.
would then radicalize
That-
people to probably take up violent action against the state, as JFK
Well, that's
correctly
because
pointed out.
there's no way to solve the problem other than that.
Yeah.
But that's
And
the
there
same
is-
and I
now.
think that's something that's unique to the state, though. Like whenever you're talking about a private company, I don't think that same type of
It's a public
difference
institution,
occurs.
but also it
Well, I mean,
also
these aren't
applies to the state because you can just leave. Just leave. Just move out of America. Just leave the country.
Yeah, excuse me. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
No.
I'm talking about like anything that's not the government.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, in this circumstance, I think that it is perfectly reasonable for the universities to listen to the demands. But beyond that, I think that this is a good pressure point. It's a good pressure point that's like immediately in front of you. It's like a local vector for organizing. So I think it's really, really good to continue increasing public pressure and increasing demonstrations in this regard, because ultimately it doesn't seem like the American government is going to respond to the demands being made by the broadest majority of the American population in terms of
You mean
our tax
in terms
dollars
of,
going
like,
to Israel.
Well, I don't know. Like, I mean, do you have any data on that? I'm actually kind of curious because I was actually wondering about that myself. What do you think that do you think that people are like more against Israel? Because I feel like there's like an obvious, like really big generational divide. Because I was
Yeah.
talking to my dad about this, and like a lot of people that are like his age are like very pro-Israel, and a lot of people that are our age and younger, especially, are more pro-Palestine.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that the older you get, the more calcified your position on Israel is, because like it's easier to manipulate.
World War II and
oh,
also
no,
like
not even that. It's more so.
Oh.
It depends on your media diet. If your media diet is less diverse, and the older you are, the more you like remember a time when there was like, you know, 8 newspapers and fucking 3 TV channels, where that message is like super easy to control. The more you heard like relentless dick riding of Israel from mainstream media, which you of course trusted. Why wouldn't you? That's the major difference between the generational divide, is that like kids can literally see on TikTok and on social media like Palestinians directly advocating for their own interests. They can see people on the Israeli side directly doing atrocities and celebrating them, like the viral TikTok trends and whatnot that pop off in Israel. Or
I don't think. I guess it hasn't been terrible.
It's
definitely
with Ukraine, right? I mean,
it's like serving to like rehabilitate Asman's image, even though he's not conceded on literally anything. He's gonna be like, oh well, like, you know, he at least tried to learn. And he's made some bad takes, but at least he's almost there. You know, he's learning. A lot of this, even though he's gonna go back into his hug box and do the exact same thing.
Stated that that is the precise reason why they are banning TikTok inevitably. Is because they don't like that there is no control over it, as far as like as far as being able to like influence TikTok to make certain censorious decisions. And I think that they find that to be a big problem. But let me see if I can find you like the American like the overall American perspective and how it's shifted over the years on Israel Palestine.
That's not even like necessarily relevant to the situation though. You know what I mean?
It's very hard to get any sort of real temperature check on anything. I remember like whenever they got
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's popular or if it's unpopular. He's gonna say it's bad and wrong regardless. You know what I mean?
It's very hard to figure out like real information.
Yeah, I mean, like Harvard Harris is like a really bad poll, for example. Like there's certain polls that are like really bad, where they'll add like a shit ton of qualifiers, only show the Palestinian side as not Palestinians in general, but like Hamas. And they have many different ways of like creating the type of outcome that you want to get. I'm trying to give you like the one that I remember, one of the recent polls that I remember showed that under the age of 35, 81% of Americans are
in a situation
with disapprove of Joe Biden's mishandling of Israel, Palestine. 81%.
I would not be surprised. I mean, I like based off of just like, I mean, again, it's a vibe check, right? But like my vibe check of the internet, yeah, absolutely.
Like, what does this matter? It just, and I'm also feeling tired.
I don't know. I feel
different
like
polls different polls I've seen show like overwhelming majority support from both independents and Democrats, and even a majority of support from the Republican Party in terms of a ceasefire, for example, which is a position that the Biden administration has like not budged on, and seemingly claims that they care about and want to bring about, but never really done so. So
I think they're just paying it lip service.
Absolutely. So
it seems like.
So there's stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So my question, I guess, is what is to be done in that situation? Because like, I think that
he's gonna say vote, dog.
Democratically speaking, part of the reason why we voted for Joe Biden, myself and many others in my demographic voted for Joe Biden, because we saw the horrifying ways in which like the BLM protests were dealt with by the police force, and that was a promise. That was a campaign promise that the Biden administration had made. And now these young Americans are also seeing that very same police resistance in another circumstance where there's like peaceful demonstrations happening. Sometimes it hasn't gotten to like Black Lives Matter point yet. Obviously, it's not as widely attended. And it.
Asman was also against that. So.
It hasn't like turned into riots, I guess.
Real.
In this circumstance, but But that is a direct contradiction of like what you voted for, what we all
It
voted
is,
for in
and
this
I
circumstance.
I don't think that you really voted for Joe Biden for that reason, because
What?
like you voted for him because he was the option that the Democratic Party gave you. Because like I think that you were Bernie Sanders, like you were about that, and
Yeah,
then they
no,
just
that was yeah.
yeah,
But
he got fucked.
no, for sure. But my point is that was a part of it. The part of it that was that he's not Donald Trump, and Donald Trump was the one that was like actively suppressing and saying law and order over and over again when faced with like the Black Lives Matter protest. So that was the assessment from many who voted for Joe Biden, thinking that like, well, he would be able to bring about some positive change and maybe tackle some of the issues within policing and discrimination. Now, obviously that didn't happen, but beyond that, there are many other campaign promises that were violated, including but not limited to, dealing with protesters, like talking about, journalists getting arrested and whatnot. That was another major point of consideration.
He still is not answered. It is kind of Hassan's fault. I wanted to answer. What is to be done?
And we will not allow any president to quiet our voice. We won't let those who see this as an opportunity to sow chaos throw up a smokescreen to distract us from the very real and legitimate grievances at the heart of these protests. Now that he's president, however,
I'm turning his lights off, Chad.
He basically reinforced the law and order must happen narrative that Donald Trump was advocating for. So my question always is like, well, what is to be done? How do you and many other Americans get our lawfully elected representatives to
dramatic lighting
actually follow through on the demands that they originally ran on the promises that they originally made?
I don't know, because I think it's a very complex question, because I'm sure some promises are made and then somebody gets into office and they realize, wait a minute, it's not that simple, it's not that easy. And I think there are probably instances, I'm not saying this is one of them, I think it's actually in fact not, but I think that there are probably instances where campaign promises are made with partial information, and then whenever the person gets more information, they decide not to do it.
The promise was, we will not brutalize you in the streets like Trump did.
Was in elected office and was the vice president.
Years, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying this is an example, but I think that there are instances of that, but I don't really know what is the option for that. What do you do? Because this is the question, like, what do you think?
Come on.
Because I don't know.
Come on.
Because what do you do? Like a riot? Do you like go and like have a recall? I think at a certain point, it's like, I think a lot of people get tricked into voting for this person, and
said,
I don't know how to solve that, because the Democratic and Republican parties are so big.
You
it's
say
like,
that encampments are the wrong thing,
but I think that
you
just kind of have to, and I don't know like what alternative you could do that would have any sort of like real meaningful impact.
Right. Well, this is one vector of pressure, like protests, campus-wide protests in general on the streets. It's a very good and historically very successful way to get the government to meet your demands, even if it's halfway. So that's why I'm in support of the
Does he change his mind?
Palestinian pro-Palestinian encampments that are happening all around campuses all around the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like my perspective is that I support the idea. I support the freedom of speech. I think that at a certain point, whenever you are breaking the law does have to be upheld to a certain extent.
Democracy,
But I also think that people's ability to protest should also be upheld. I think that, for example, like camping out somewhere for 6 days and not leaving even after they tell you to leave and the police tell you to leave, I think that's too much. But I also don't.
Why? They told them to leave because they said that it was endangering the students themselves, like in the encampment, saying that and in that circumstance, if they truly cared about that, they could have used the police to protect the encampment rather than.
Well, that's clearly not the real reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were lying.
That's
so
the
you
point.
believe?
That's what I mean. And if that's not the reason, and that's just simply the seasoning that they're adding on to the conversation, then there's one real reason why they're doing it, and that is because they just want the students to shut the fuck up and go away.
Get the fuck out of there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
Which
I think it's a bad thing. It definitely is a bad thing, but at the same time, I also think it's a bad thing for a bunch of people to just go camp out at the university for, multiple days at a time. I think that's not unreasonable.
Right
I don't think that I'm being unreasonable with this.
You are.
But I also think that they're
being a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing because there's no other options at that point for people to actually make a fuss, kind of, you know what I mean, in the most peaceful ways possible. That's precisely what the students are doing because there's no other option there. Do you see what I'm saying? Like there's legitimately no other option, just like there was no other option in the
school. Like they don't have to go. But then
there's another school. You go to another school. That school also has the same restrictions. That school also has the same issues, right? And ultimately, you arrive at like there's no school that doesn't have this this problem. And beyond that, I don't think people should have to leave their schools anyway. I think that the right thing to do in this circumstance is to make demands and to see if enough people get on board with your cause. And if enough people do get on board with your cause, even if there is violent resistance from the police force, ultimately the school should capitulate to the demands that you're making. We have power in numbers, and that's ultimately how democracy does work and should work. But beyond that, laws in this circumstance, as I tried to detail earlier, are just
made by
they're used as a legal justification for the actual reason, which you and I both agree on, which is not necessarily it's not necessarily the encampments and the space that they occupy, but rather what the students are saying.
Oh yeah, I mean the campus has the right to do that though, and I think that if you don't follow the laws, then nobody has any sort of benchmark or frame of reference to how to make any decision. You just have
chat. We arrive at question number 1. Do you think that there's a genocide in Palestine? Because the answer for Asmongold is no. So nothing else he says matters because at step 1, he doesn't think it's urgent. He does not think that it's like, you know what I mean? He says, oh, Boston Tea Party was important because it was urgent. Oh, civil rights was important because it's urgent. Oh, slavery was important because it's urgent. This issue isn't urgent. That's what we arrived at. You know what I mean? He has not gotten past question number 1.
The civil rights movement, though, Rosa Parks
thank you.
refusing to sit at the back of the bus.
Here. Like I'm not going.
Student protests and sit-ins being enforced in the Montgomery bus boycott. Like these are all disruptive acts of civil disobedience that were met with violent police brutality at the end of it. Like I don't think you have this opinion. You share this opinion on the civil rights movement, I suspect, right?
Well, it's a much different situation. I mean, of course.
What did I tell you? What did I tell you?
Yeah, I mean, like one of them you're protesting against a government, and the other one you're protesting against a university. A university isn't a government.
Okay, well, state universities. Well, they did protest against universities as well.
Thank you.
During the civil rights movement. So
what I'm saying is that I think that if you're talking about the actual if you're talking about actual laws, then yeah, people, if they want to protest, the best way to protest is to fucking vote. Like that's what needs to happen.
Oh yes, black people just need to vote during civil rights.
Just getting a bunch of people together and then hopefully the government is going to do what you want. Because also, like, just because there's a lot of people protesting,
that's not the take you think it is.
That means that that's what the majority of the people want.
Yeah, because the majority of the people did not want, any kind of desegregation in
Let me
general.
just call my ancestors and say, just vote, dog.
It depends probably on where, but I think that in some cases you're probably right. Where they had to like march
especially in the South, yeah.
And stuff like that. Yeah, you're right about that.
So
that was that was the minority in that circumstance, and allies of the black community demonstrating unlawfully, like they were breaking the law. They were specifically going to segregated institutions, whether it be universities or whether it be restaurants, private establishments, and demonstrating in a show of force.
This is bad for Asmon.
These are unlawful. These are unjust laws. that are in place, and these are unjust practices that are in place that are turned that the government turns a blind eye to, and that needs to change. And in that instance, just like these students, like there were plenty of different mechanisms of the state that, no, it wasn't just the government. I'm saying like private institutions were the ones who are enforcing segregation on their own volition. The reason why we have specific rights that actually interfere in the way that private businesses conduct their affairs on the boundaries of exclusion for certain races and even gender discrimination is specifically because, and this was the segregationist argument at the time, which was just let the businesses do whatever they want. I'm sure that people will take their dollars elsewhere.
Good argumentation.
But it didn't work that way. Plenty of people actually genuinely loved the idea that there were white-only institutions. White people had more capital than black people, especially in the South. And therefore, all of these businesses, if it wasn't for the federal government, inevitably due to a tremendous amount of protest and a tremendous amount of resistance and a lot of state violence that tried to squash this democratic resistance. If it wasn't for all of that, then, you know, we would still not have any laws that interfere in the affairs of private businesses and refuse them to allow them to discriminate.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, definitely. I think if you're talking about the protests that are happening now, I do think that is different than the civil rights movement. It's certainly different.
How?
And whenever you're talking about the civil rights movement, also, like, I don't know if we can really apply something that happened 60 years ago to something that's happening right now or 50 years ago.
Bro, I'm glad you said that first. Right, thank
it's
you.
very hard for me to say. I think in some cases you're probably right. In some cases, maybe not so much.
What do you mean by it's different?
Thank you.
It's different because the entire culture is different. The way that people are making decisions is different. The way that people can vote is different. There are all of these ways that are different.
Sure, black people can vote.
Mean, so yeah, black people were not, you know, they couldn't really vote. I mean, I guess it's not that different now because there's many different ways of legally restricting black people from voting.
But like, how does that matter? How does this?
But that's more complex. But ultimately,
how does it matter?
The methods were unlawful. The point I was trying to arrive at here is that the methods were unlawful. They were seen as unlawful. They were seen as
I will say gamer words.
They were met with a lot of police.
They don't want me on the call.
Resistance.
They do not want me on the call.
Ultimately, that police resistance led to a shit ton of violence, and people were talking about the chaos in the exact same terms and in the exact same boundaries as they do right now with respect to the pro-Palestinian encampments. But ultimately,
they do need to wrap this up, though. I have a hard stop
following
at
on the footsteps of those
another meeting to go to.
Who fought bravely for civil rights and fought bravely against the Vietnam War. In some instances, occupying the exact same spaces.
Oh, I mean, like, and I understand that. I have no problem with them doing that, but I do have a problem doing it whenever it's destroying property and taking away other people's education.
But they said that about the civil rights movement as well, is what I mean.
Thank you.
Ultimately, I think I'm glad that they had the ends justify the means attitude during the civil rights movement. And I'm glad that they had a ends justify the means attitude during the Vietnam War protests or during the boycott, divestment, and sanctions protests
against. I think those conflicts are way more complex than that.
Well, BDS is identical. It's the same exact. It's literally like almost definitionally identical. It's a boycott, divestment, and sanctions on apartheid South Africa in 1985.
You get to say it's different and ended there.
Student-led movement as well, and the methods were identical too. The only difference is South Africa did not have the benefit of having another South Africa that they could learn the mistakes from and make sure that they don't repeat it. Israel had South Africa to look to, so they could like set up a lobbying effort and ensure that the state bends to their will.
We're not having that there, dog. No, we say fuck Aspen every day, all day, every day, dog. No, there's no charitability here.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Israel is
no
much
honey.
more influential
it's all
than
vinegar,
that.
dog. It's
I mean,
acid,
I can see where you're coming from.
We ain't catching no flies. We're burning the flies.
I think that type of mindset is very scary to me because while you're right that it does create a lot of positive outcomes, it also creates a lot of negative outcomes as well.
Do you have examples of the negative
Thank you.
outcomes? Like as far as a democratically organized revolutionary movement.
Chad has no mercy? Not anymore. Not for Asmongold, not anymore.
What do you mean by that?
Like,
what you just said.
Well, I'm just saying
like
that
is
if
there,
you,
is
what
there
you
an
just said.
example that you can give me throughout
Are there any
history where
examples?
people organized on certain boundaries that were like democratically organized on certain boundaries and they enforced
he
the
said,
tyranny
well,
of
like if it
majority
happens, like
and,
positive
like,
outcomes,
something
what about the negative
awful happened
outcomes?
as
It
a
sounds like
consequence of
where?
that?
He's like, what do you mean?
I'm sure I could think of some. I mean, absolutely. And I think it happens all the time on a very basic level. Like, for example, like during the BLM riots, people were obviously burning down buildings and doing things like that.
They
That's
were
something
just.
I don't really support, and I don't think that that's beneficial, and I'm never going to support that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not helping anybody. It's not doing anything for anyone. It's purely destructive, and I don't think that people have the right to do that. I think that, yeah, you should have the right to protest, but if you use the justification for the ends justify the means, then I think that anybody can use that justification, and that justification can be used for malicious reasons. And there's the
But he has
only
no
way
examples,
to
by the way.
have a world that's fair is to have some sort of generally accepted rules, and that's what we have for laws. And I see where you're coming from with the civil rights movement, but you have to see the perspective that I have too, that if you allow people to just, justify themselves by thinking, well, our cause is righteous, so it's okay for us to do it, it would immediately cause huge amounts of chaos.
He's racist.
Yeah, because no, I understand. This is exactly the same arguments launched against the
He's
civil
a
rights movement
racist
as well.
person.
MLK spoke on this, with great frequency, where in the eyes of those who are being wronged, or in their experiences, not even in their own perspective, their regular existence is chaotic, right?
He said, chat. He said, I know what you're saying with the civil rights movement, but have you considered my perspective? I just don't think you can say the ends justify the means. I think the ends justify the means pretty well.
He very specifically talks about people who were naysayers to the civil rights movement who said like, oh no, now is not the time, or things are actually much better than they would be if black people were still enslaved, and there's too much property damage happening. The point is, from their perspective at that time, for black people, especially living in the segregated South or even redlined in the North, America was consistently chaotic, and it still is for many people of color, especially living in.
Important to mind, like you're talking about Martin Luther King, he also explicitly was against blocking transportation, and so there were lines even that he had.
Nuts. Don't invoke the name of Martin Luther King, dog. You know nothing about the man. You know nothing. Read a book. Pick up a single book in your life, dog.
I don't know if I can link this.
He led the Montgomery bus boycott for 382 days.
He wrote a letter from
which
jail,
officially ended
dog.
on December 20th, 1956.
He wrote a letter from jail. They arrested him. What do you think you arrested him for?
I sent you a link in the chat.
He was blocking the roads.
In the Discord chat?
Yeah.
Asmon died on his hood. Wild. I don't know why. I don't know why. It doesn't make sense.
King and Lewis, along with millions of Americans, struggle to figure out what would amount to legitimate, appropriate forms of nonviolent protest. Tactics dramatic enough to make their impact, but not so disruptive as to alienate supporters. Okay. Everyone could agree on the nobility, even the genius of the original sit-ins, conducted with such dignity that their moral power was overwhelming. What is this? At an early press conference, an organizer with King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference declared, "We will tie up public transportation by laying our bodies prostrate on the runways of airports across railroad tracks." This degree of disorder was too much even for King, who walked back the staffers' comments. Over the summer, as the Kennedy administration reversed course to support the march, Rustin realized that attracting hundreds of thousands of marchers he desired meant abandoning the controversial tactics that would alienate the mainstream. In the end, as comedian and activist Dick Gregory said, the march went off like a Sunday church picnic. Ultimately, these protests at the time were still declared disruptive, though. You understand that, right?
Who can play that game, Asmongold?
Every single instance, including the Montgomery bus boycott, was declared to be disruptive and at the time, and was violently suppressed by the state. Like none of these protests, not a single one of these protests actually was met with hugs and kisses, and the state being like, you know what, you guys are making a sound argument. And at the time, the coverage,
I think that whenever you justify, like you can't just do anything that you want whenever you've decided that you have the moral authority to do that. Like it's very easy to go and look at the civil rights movement and say, well, they did this to an extent, so it's okay for us to do it. But if you apply this to real life, I don't think that it really works. Like, just because you're morally aggrieved about something, it doesn't give you the right to destroy other people's property, to stay on their property, or to do things that hurt other people.
Well, the property is not their property. We established that. Like, this is, they participated in sit-ins in colleges in the civil rights movement as well. They were doing exactly the same stuff that these students are doing, if not much more militant. There's also another side of the civil rights movement that often doesn't get discussed in mainstream media or in our schools in general, that also played a significant role, according to MLK as well, which was the more militant action where Black people would
this is gonna be good.
with weapons.
I need to know. I need to know if he's gonna say that Black people were not justified for having weapons. Tell me. Say it, Asman.
Play a role
say the
in
words.
Increasing pressure points
say
for the
state words.
To look at the more reasonable parties, the peaceful demonstrations, and concede to the demands being made by all of the parties.
Say it.
So all of this played an active role. You can't have one without the other. Is what
basically,
I mean.
I need
but
to
even
say
in this
the words.
circumstance, we're looking at only one aspect: the civil disobedience of the civil rights movement.
Right. You're right whenever you say you can't have one without the other, but I don't think that being an inevitability justifies the other. So
but they haven't even reached that point, is what I'm saying. We're currently in the beginning stages. We're currently in the stage where we're getting upset and using ruthless police tactics to stop peaceful demonstrations from occurring.
Bro.
Like, that's these demonstrations have not even met like the civil disobedience metrics of the civil rights movement even.
Yeah, I think that really, I mean, I'll go back to what I said initially. I don't think that a group of students should be able to go into the university and just start camping out there.
Okay, you pivot.
Ultimately, the point is, like, there's nothing that they can do, right? Like, because I asked, like, what can they do then? And you said that they should just go to a different university. Well, what happens when that university also has endowments?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, the world is not obligated to appeal to you. The world, like, if other people don't want to do what you want,
do nothing to stop a genocide.
Like
that's what he says.
Has to find a way
he doesn't care.
That it's
he doesn't
okay
care.
for you to do.
He doesn't care.
Like, if other people don't want to agree with you, it's not your right to force them to agree with you.
He doesn't care. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. He doesn't care.
Yeah,
he doesn't care.
This isn't about other people forcing other people to agree with you. That's more so about getting the state to follow through.
He doesn't care. He doesn't care. He doesn't care.
On
he doesn't care. He doesn't care.
The majority opinion is in many instances.
He does not care.
In some instances, it's not the majority opinion, but it's like the morally righteous thing to do. Like in the civil rights movement, I would say. Despite the fact that it was not the majority opinion, I think you and I both agree that the civil rights movement was objectively a good thing. And the methods were infinitely more disruptive at the time than what the pro-Palestinian side has done so far in terms of college campuses and everywhere around.
That is guaranteed. You're totally right about that. Obviously, it's not as bad as civil rights. It's not even remotely as close. I also don't think it's as extreme. Like, obviously, civil rights
that wasn't even his point.
Happening in America to Americans at that exact moment. What's happening over at Israel is much more disconnected from us. I don't really ever see that.
The disconnection does stem. You're right. One is a domestic issue. One is foreign policy. The disconnection stems from the fact that most people don't really truly understand that, like, as Eisenhower once famously said, every dollar being spent on a rocket is a dollar that could be spent on building American roads, building American bricks.
No, I agree with you. Like, I completely agree with you on that. But I think that the way that you stop that is by voting for people that also agree with you. and that are going to push those policies through.
Who?
I don't think that it's reliable enough, and I don't think it's effective enough to
Tell me
try
who
to do
vote
what they're
for.
doing and hope that, because like, and I can only speak for like myself and what I've seen. I feel like the way that a lot of those people, the protesters, have conducted themselves and what they're doing, I think a lot of people don't like it. And I feel like
Ask him
it's
if it's genocide.
alienated a lot of different
Hassan,
people.
Ask him
And
if
I
it's
don't
a
think it's helped
genocide.
at all.
He needs to answer question
I
number
think that the
one.
mainstream media definitely massages the narrative in a certain direction. A lot
He
of people
needs to
probably
answer
see them
question
and
number
only
one.
hear about how anti-Semitic they are, even though that's not the case.
Well,
So that
here's
definitely
also
plays a role.
is like
He's
like my
learning
community,
trust.
like obviously that's the viewpoint that I have, right? But like I'm sure your community probably disagrees with me on this, and like you know,
Yes.
you guys, yeah, I bet. And so like yeah, you guys probably have like the opposite, like probably like 90-10 or like 80-20 that I do. And so it's very hard for me really to say for sure. But I do think that by doing that, or like by the protests, like I don't really know if it's really helped the cause hardly at all. And
Well,
I think
it seems like polling is still pretty consistent and consistently favoring the Palestinian side on this matter.
at least for that's what you said, yeah.
Yeah, so the student-led protests have not, as far as I've seen, have not actually changed the public opinion and public attitude. And I'm willing to bet that the violent suppression of the state for these otherwise peaceful demonstrations, no matter how hard the media massages the narrative, will most likely lead to larger and larger demonstrations. There's only too many old white ladies that cops can brutalize because they're saying don't do a genocide in my name, until the American public goes, holy shit, okay, this is too.
Can I get a quick recap of how this discussion has gone? That's your recap.
Personally had killed 200 humanitarian aid workers up until a couple of weeks prior. And obviously that kind of information wasn't really breaching the public consciousness as hard as when Israel killed 7 white aid workers from the World Central Kitchen. That was a big turning point where the majority even of older people said, all right, they've gone too far. This is unconscionable. This is, you know.
All right, Hassan, you got 9 minutes. I need y'all to wrap it up a little bit.
America pushes Israel so hard. I don't really understand the reason why. I mean, like, of course, it's probably just money, but it's very surprising for me to see it happen. It seems like it's almost there's like a level of dissonance there.
No,
because
it comes from strategic interest, strategic importance. Israel is our forward operating base in a resource-rich region.
It's been a 2-hour call.
That
you were right. I went live as soon as it started. It's been 2 hours. I have a meeting at 9:30.
Scary enemies that we have that shouldn't really be enemies at all, but
and I still have this Elden Ring bot to code. Gosh darn it!
Conditionally offering full-throated support to Israel, no matter what the fuck they do.
You always have a meeting. I have a job.
I think that you're completely right.
I'm sorry, I have a job, Chad.
And like, and the reason why I said I don't know is because, like, I'm happy to hear you say that, because I've always felt like kind of a conspiracy theorist that like Israel exists basically to, you know, create unrest or destabilize the Middle East. So it's good, at least.
It's a settler colony. It started off as a British settler colonial project, and it continued as we took over the torch from the British.
It literally cannot for this meeting. I'm sorry. I am literally like one of the most important people. I need to be there. I can maybe push it back 15 more minutes, but it's already super late.
Are powerful and monolithically, you know, in a scary way, controlling the media or some shit like that. It's just that, like, Jews argue with one another all the fucking time. There is a significantly larger group of American evangelical Zionists that are responsible for a lot more donations going to Israel, specifically in places like Texas, as a matter of fact, and all around, all those mega churches in your, you know, around where you live, they are all way bigger dick riders of Israel, despite the fact that they hold anti-Semitic beliefs sometimes themselves.
I don't fucking understand it either, man. I don't.
You don't understand anything.
It's a theological justification that they have. They believe that Jesus Christ is going to come back to earth, and the rapture is going to happen, and that
like none of this is relevant. I'm sorry, Asmongold knows nothing about the topic. I'm gonna be real and honest. It's not relevant at all. He does. This doesn't make sense to him. You know what I mean? This actually might be doing a little bit more harm than good at this point, because like he just doesn't know what's going on.
In order to create the conditions for the rapture, which means that all that entire land must be dominated by Jews and Jews only.
He's pandering. He's pandering. He's pandering. He's pandering. 100% he's pandering. I said it before, I'll say it again. I've been covering Asmongold for the last 5 days pretty consistently. He's pandering.
Like Israel's behavior is unconscionable, and they said, you know, not in our name. We don't want this anymore. If every single Jew in America was anti-Zionist, Israel would still be allowed to operate in the exact same way, and America would still give Israel all of the fucking money and all of the political power to do whatever the fuck they want to do, because it doesn't have anything to do with American Jews as much as it has something to do with American interest in the region.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I said that in my chat. I mean, I even said, like, I don't know if this is going to be a bad take, but I wouldn't have been surprised if Israel knew that October 7th stuff was going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if they let it happen.
I don't know if I wouldn't go that far. I mean, I think that it's their arrogance and their hubris that caused October 7th to happen. The arrogance.
Yeah, but Asmongold saying they knew, you know what I mean, could lean into something, because Asmongold is not like well versed in it doesn't matter. Asmongold, the way he's saying, like, oh, I feel like I'm a conspiracy theory. It means something different in that brain. That's my point, right? It does not feel genuine. Like he knows like what it means to be like they knew. You know what I mean? That's my point is.
And it turns
which is why Hassan pushed back on that. Very rightfully so.
Keep pressuring people over and over again and trap them in like inhumane conditions and expect them not to lash out and retaliate. But it's that very same arrogance. But it is more so arrogance than some conspiracy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, that's why I was kind of curious. Like, what do you think is going to happen? Like, what do you, like in 20 years? Like, what do you think the resolution of this is going to be?
And this is what I'm going to call it. Just because I don't know if there's anything productive that's going to come here. I think they're wrapping up the discussion. I do have a meeting in 4 minutes. So, this is insane. Yeah. I'm gonna call it here. Nothing productive came for an entire 2 hours. I didn't even know it was going to be 2 hours. My parents probably hate me. They know I stream in the mornings. They don't know I stream at nights and stuff. Geez, thanks for all the new follows. I don't know where all you guys are coming from. We hit 12K for this stream, I guess. In conclusion, I will leave you off with the one thing that I think we should all say about Asmongold. Here.
There's like actual journalism being conducted.
I will leave you off with the one thing I think we should all say about Asmongold. Wait, what is this? Is this me? What clip is this from?
Hundreds of mass.
Why is it popping out that clip instead of this one? That's so weird to me. Let me just
conversation talking about the dangers that TikTok presents.
So stupid.
Has changed the designation, directly changed the designation of anti-Semitism to criticisms of Israel. Anytime someone sees a Jewish student, for example, sees a placard that says "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," or "Free Palestine," or whatever, that is now declared an anti-Semitic hate crime. Like, it is unconscionable to weaponize.
Here, thank you for being here, chat. I will leave you with this tweet, because this is how I think everybody should react to Asmongold.
Or Israel's problem?
Hundreds of mass.
I don't really give a fuck about what Palestine's problems are or Israel's problems are. But
fuck you.
hundreds of
That's
mass.
about me to hear your
don't
commentary.
really give a
I had to go live to share my commentary. But yeah, honestly, chat, 8.8K, 4.4K, we could ratio him if we mobilize the mules. We can get a ratio going. Help me ratio him, please. It'd be so funny. It'd be so funny. Regardless, don't get used to streams this late. Oh yeah, I have a meeting in a minute. Jeez Louise.
That bother him, talks about community notes, but then literally will
Tomorrow
take
night
down
at the same
community
time.
notes
Yeah, definitely same time tomorrow.
From his own form of misinformation, and he does
To
it
be
in like
fair,
very thin-skinned ways.
Notes. I am a huge fan of community notes.
Yeah, but community notes.
Yeah, thank you for being here, everybody.
Yeah.
Community notes work.
I don't know what they're yapping about now. Let's see what people got going on right now. What is Caroline doing? That's probably why Katie's not here. I just talking about the protest too. All right. I never get to rate Caroline. Caroline always goes late to or goes live too late. All right, chat. Bye. Wait.
On
the
discount.
website, you can
Yeah.
log in. Yeah.
That
like
chain is
yeah.
literally on
Caroline,
discount.
it's not the first rate to Caroline. If I'm being entirely real and honest.
Suspiciously. So, community notes in that situation, if you
Okay, they're just yapping. All right, chat. Bye. One more time for the one time. Do this to an Aspen goal today. You know what I mean? Do your daily Aspen gold condemnations.
hundreds of mass.
I don't.
Hundreds of mass.
I don't really give a fuck about what Palestine's problems are or Israel's problems are. But
Fuck you. Bye. Goodbye.
Hundreds of mass.
I don't really give a fuck about what Palestine's problems are or Israel's problems are. But
Fuck you.
Hundreds of mass.
I don't really give a fuck about what
How do I
Palestine's
end this
problems
stream?
are or Israel's problems.